session to order. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Madam Manager.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This work session is to present to you formally the proposed manager's budget for fiscal year 2018. It's a little bit different than we have done in prior years. In prior years, usually you've got the manager's recommendation as related to county departments on May 1st. And then after we receive the school board submission, you would receive the combined budget later on, closer to June 1st. This year, since the Board of Education provided us with their budget earlier in the process, we were able to provide you with both the manager's recommendation as it related to county departments as well as the Board of Education. And Mr. Yates, our CFO, will be going over the budget in some detail, and then we will be prepared to answer any questions or provide additional information that you may require. Jeff?
As Cindy mentioned, we have a little bit of a departure from the process we've used in the past. With the school's timing this year, it made sense for us just to bring you the entire budget. So we're a little bit later in the process than we normally are with the manager's budget, but about a week and a half earlier with the school side of the equation. So what you have today in front of you represents the full budget recommendation from the manager and fulfills that obligation under the general statute. So what I wanted to do is kind of spend a little bit of time talking through the different aspects of what's in the budget and what's in the recommendation. I just want to remind you, we're kind of working through our vision statement, and the statement's through the continuity of leadership and direction and built upon the consensus of the community, we identify and implement strategies, programs, and services necessary to promote and sustain the quality of life and lifestyles unique to Union County. I think one of the interesting aspects of this year's budget and the process we went through was really a focus on the strategic objectives that you as a board has approved. As we looked forward in trying to establish and build a structure for going forward in the next couple of years. And I think particularly with the bond election and some of the efforts that are going on around the county, more than anything, and as I look back, and Cindy, please chime in if you see it a little differently, is that as we were building this budget, it really became about setting the table for looking forward and how we approach kind of the future, and particularly from the aspects of sustainability and service provision, and how we address kind of the changing needs in the county. So today I want to talk a little bit about what the big budget drivers are or were, particularly from a revenue side. We'll start with revenue and then kind of throughout the discussion talk about the expenditure side discussions, or drivers. Talk about a little bit about your strategic objectives that we worked through in trying to achieve in this budget, how the operating capital budget addresses those objectives, and then kind of what the next steps are in the process. Because we are doing a little bit different process this year, I wanted to just kind of remind you and lay out what the next steps are for that. So looking at the budget drivers, probably the biggest thing that we saw was really this changing service dynamic. And if you remember back to the 1st of March when we did the projections document, we talked a lot about how the demographics in Union County are changing. The age of our population is changing, our student population is declining, the older end of our population is increasing. That necessarily has an impact on your service delivery models, our school age population, our development patterns, all those things are changing in Union County. And to try to keep up with that is a real challenge for government. In fact, if you look, if you remember, this is from our projections document. This goes through the completed year fiscal 2016, which is our last completed year. As you can see that demand, again, remember, this is a proxy or a measure of demand for government services. As you can see, that demand is growing every year by a couple of percentage points. And if you were to look through these, and I won't spend much time on this because we spent a lot of time in the projections document, but all aspects, pretty much all aspects are growing with the exception of the school age population within the county. So that kind of requires us to take a step back as management and as the county and look at how we're providing those services. And I think that occurred this year going through the budget process. And then continued growth on the revenue side. If we adjust for the rate changes on the rate, proposed changes in the rates, you're looking at about 3 to 4% growth in revenue. And that is from new construction, modification, added value, all those different things that are going on in a non-reval year. So that's really healthy growth, and we continue to see healthy growth on the automobile tax side. Now, this isn't the comparable growth to what you were seeing in the 2000s. It's not double-digit growth, but it's fairly steady growth. And that's, I know from my perspective, is what we'd like to see. It means the county's growing at a pace that we can keep up with, particularly on the expenditure side and so forth. Sales taxes, we continue to see really healthy growth in sales tax, particularly with the change in the allocation method. If the legislation goes through, and I haven't talked to Michelle, so I'm not exactly sure where that legislation is at this point, the impact to the county would be a loss of about $300,000. But we're seeing about a 10% growth in sales tax, or about $4.3 million. Keep it in mind that sales tax across the county is shared with the volunteer fire departments through those tax districts. So not all of that $4.3 million goes into the general fund. Some of that growth then goes out to those fire districts. And then intergovernmental revenue, while we're seeing lots of growth in property taxes and sales taxes, we're not seeing comparable growth in the intergovernmental revenue. And those revenues come primarily from our contracts with the towns for law enforcement, and mostly in human services and our human services, social services, health department areas. So we're not seeing the federal government and the state government keep up with the cost of their service. In fact, if you were to look, a large part of the growth in human services is required or is generated from those positions that are partly reimbursed and so forth. So just to kind of remind you, going back to our strategic objectives, number one was public safety, and I won't read them to you, but you can review those there. Community consensus, economic development, sustainability, and organizational strengthening. And I think in going through, and if you were to look at the document, what you would see is we kind of worked around those specific objectives and trying to build capacity within the organization to address those. First and foremost, and I believe when you, the board in 2012 prioritized the work plan, public safety was the number one out of all of those items. 4-day telecommunicators, and this is essentially amounts to one per shift in the E911 center. Demand monitoring system, this allows the automated deployment or stationing of emergency medical units. Right now that's done through a manual process. Our public safety radio program, and this is a kind of a multifaceted approach to it. In this program, we have about $1.4 million for the replacement of radios. And we've been notified by the manufacturer of those radios that they're going to stop maintaining those. I believe it was the fall of 2018, is they're going to stop producing parts and upgrades or updates to the software that run those radios. And these radios would encompass fire, EMS, and the law enforcement units that the emergency radio program services. We have about $217,000 for radio installation staffing. One of the things we do right now is we send all of our units out to a private contractor for the radio installation, the upfit, and make ready. And that results in units waiting to be placed in service. In fact, right now we have several units waiting for the Sheriff's Department waiting to go into service. Allowing us, with the addition of these installation positions, will allow us then to do that install ourselves. Also be reactive to repair needs. And we manage the school bus radio program. I know we've had some conversations with other municipalities about doing their radio install as well. So we believe with the size and the complexity of our radio program, it's time for us to do that in-house versus contracting that out. There's no one here in Union County that provides that service currently. They go down to South Carolina to do that. $850,000 for the radio installation facility. That would just provide a safe, dry space, climate control for them to do that work. And I will point out, as Cindy always reminds me, when we talk about, for instance, the 217, that is the fully loaded cost of those positions. So that includes their equipment, their truck, their salary, and benefits. That's the first year cost, so that's what you see in this budget. $450,000 for bi-directional antennas at 15 schools. Right now, the school resource officers have some dead spots for their radios, and the radios for law enforcement are their main line of communication and their lifeline. So this will help clear up those dead spots. Curtis and his group went to all 53 schools and did an analysis and a test to see where those dead spots were. We looked into some of the other options, Wi-Fi, cell, those things, and this is the preferred, the best fit solution to do that and to ensure that protection. A new fire marshal. One of the challenges we have right now, given the growth in Union County, is that we are unable to meet the required inspection, the required inspection cycles on the class 1, 2, and 3 facilities. And Curtis can talk more about that, but there's a lot of detail, and there's a lot of detail in your document concerning that. But and the addition of a new fire marshal will help to catch up and to begin get in compliance with that mandated inspection cycle. And they have varying different facilities they'd be at. And then currently also administrative services, we're recommending administrative support. Right now there's not an administrative support position for all emergency services. And this impacts the service area because it requires the fire marshals or the staff to do administrative tasks when they should be or could be out doing their assigned task in their core function. So this would allow the staff, for instance, the fire marshals, to be out in the field doing the inspections versus covering the front counter. It will also help service the public by providing someone there 8 to 5 to receive permit applications to allow for folks to come in and pick up reports and do all those things. In addition, this position will help coordinate inspections, coordinate permitting numbers, those kinds of things.
On the radio program,
Yes.
what do we pay right now to contract it out for those services?
The contracted cost for, when we pulled the part just for the sheriff's department, it was between, I want to say $50,000 to $100,000. But keeping in mind, this is for a little bit more than what we do through that contract. So this would be picking up that cost plus allowing us to continue the bus radio program and doing the other work that we don't necessarily capture in-house right now. So
that $100,000 does not include the bus program?
no, it does not.
And you mentioned there are some radios that are still waiting to be installed. You know how many?
I do not know off the top of my head. Curtis, do you know off the top of your head how many?
I do not know how many cars are back to.
I know they have to, when we met with the sheriff during the budget discussions, he indicated that they go to South Carolina to do the installation of not just the radios, but the light bars and a lot of those things, and that some of their newer vehicles sit for a number of months while they are waiting for the installation to occur. And so we started having the discussions with the sheriff's office probably about, say, 8 months ago about the possibility of bringing this service in-house. One was so that his folks were not driving to South Carolina and dropping off vehicles and having that wait time. And the other was trying to look at an all-inclusive. We've also had some inquiries from Monroe Police Department as to interest that if we start doing this, that they would have an interest in contracting with us to perform those services for them.
But $100,000 a year, and we're going to spend over $1 million. I mean, even if we pay $200,000 a year, that's a 5-year payback. So I guess what I would like to see is how long we're waiting for those, how many times that occurs.
Okay.
And if there's a premium or something that we need to pay in order to expedite some of those services, rather than lay out over $1 million for something that maybe could be done by a contractor.
Well, I know one of the things in discussions with the sheriff's department too is, for instance, if they have an outage or a fuse blows, that they have to go all the way to South Carolina to have that done. And with this setup, what we would have is on demand, ready to serve, a ready to serve process, so that they wouldn't lose any downtime because they don't have, for instance, if that unit's out of service, then that unit can't be on the road serving the public. So that was one of his concerns as well. You wouldn't see that necessarily in the monetary cost, but what you see is in that service aspect, ensuring that you keep the units on the road and get them turned around as fast as you can from those repairs and their need, and being able to prioritize the work to our units versus, again, those other units. So we'll be happy to
You wouldn't need a $850,000 facility for a fuse. You could
No,
probably
you
find
would,
something
absolutely
a
not.
little cheaper, something we already have.
But the issue, I think, with the facility is being able to have a place where you can take the entire car apart, because right now, they don't have a place to do that, to be able to do that and do it in a dry, safe place, climate controlled place to do that.
I'd just like to get a little more information on this
Sure.
before we spend several $1 million on a program, and especially if we're going to do 2 people to replace the radios, what are they going to be doing afterwards if there's only a short lag time on them?
I believe the lag time is a lot longer than that, but we will
Well,
certainly get that information
should we
for
have?
you.
So we have 2 people already doing that now. Ralph and another guy.
They don't do the installs necessarily
They
on
don't do
vehicles.
the
They maintain our radio system, so all the towers.
Replace fuses and things like that.
well, not necessarily in the cars. But the other thing we looked into, also we looked at financing the radios and what it would cost to lease them. And the challenge when you lease them is then also the maintenance of them and all the other aspects of those handheld radios. The manufacturer or the vendor you're leasing from won't let you maintain those. So we would lose that ability or flexibility to be able to maintain that system ourselves. That would be then contracted out, particularly on the handheld radios, which service a lot more folks, particularly the fire departments and the EMS units and those folks.
But wouldn't that be part of the lease agreement?
It would to some degree, but that's what I'm saying. You would lose that ability to do it yourself, and again, then you would fall into that queuing process where you could not address the issues in that timely manner.
But we could carry, I don't know what a radio runs individually, but I'm guessing we could have spares, or within the contract, we could demand a certain turnaround time as part of the service contract.
I would say when you're dealing with companies like Motorola, it is very difficult to negotiate those type of contract terms because they have lots of customers and usually the contracts are pretty standard.
But I know most of the time they'll agree to a response time. And then one other last question on the fire marshal. Do we know how much time they're spending on administrative services?
Number of hours.
Number of hours,
I couldn't give that
per
to you
year.
off the top of my head, but we can certainly get that for you.
please.
And what percentage of time is our fire marshal with his arson dog spending outside the county?
Well, we could get that information for you, but when the county agreed to take the arson dog was at no charge to us. And that was part of the contract considerations, is that we would also take them to other parts of the state for them providing us that dog at no charge.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Jeff, you said that there was some radios still waiting to be put into the sheriff's vehicles. Are they the old radio or the new radios?
At this point, we would be, which
Most of them would be old radios right now because radios are switched from vehicle to vehicle.
So
So part of also what they're really waiting on is the equipment to be mounted on the vehicles.
So we would be installing the old system that would be replaced as soon as we get the 1.4 million in replacement radios.
it's the wiring harnesses, it's all of the stuff in the vehicle that makes it work. So it's not just the radio unit itself, it's the,
How many of those old radios do we have? Several? Or?
I'd have to get I'd have to get the inventory for you.
Do those radios still work until they break and then they have to be replaced, or?
They would, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because what this will allow us to do is over the next couple of years, as those cycle out, we're unable to get parts, this would allow us to go ahead and start replacing those. So this isn't a run out and replace them all at one time. This is a couple of year process, but you want to have the money set aside through the capital program to be able to purchase that equipment as it becomes necessary.
So is that buying them all at one time, or is that?
It's setting aside the money to purchase them and allows us to buy them as needed over the next couple of years. Because what's going to happen is it's going to trail off as the parts become unavailable and they break. We want to be able to purchase the new radios and put those in service. So you want to be able to have that money set aside to be able to do that versus trying to come back with smaller amounts and then not be able to, when you're ready, replace them. So this sets aside the money for the project.
And I would just think that it would be an ongoing process of, $200,000-300,000 a year buying radios to replace and having them ready as they break, so you wouldn't have any downtime or very little downtime. And if the old radios still work, it sounds like we're putting some new old radio systems in the vehicles, so they may be good for 2, 3, 4 years, maybe longer than that. The other thing was the radio installation facility. I know that you told me that you've spoken to the superintendent. I've got a great interest in seeing the old bus garage. That since we were going to be building a new bus garage with bond money for schools, the old bus garage, especially with the city of Monroe, would be an outstanding place to park buses, fire trucks, police cars, everything could fit in there.
And we talked to the superintendent. That facility, what was explained to us, is it is not just used for servicing the school buses. That's also where their maintenance staff is housed. It is their intention to continue to hold on to that facility and do some minor modifications to it and have it used by their maintenance staff. So that's my understanding. That is, it is not something that they are going to be abandoning. It's something that they're going to continue as part of their operations.
And just in my discussions with some of the school board members, they were interested in using that. If we could use it to offset, the 850,000, they were interested in doing that. So maybe some more discussions before we make the determination on 850.
I went to the superintendent and asked the question. I did not go to any of their board
I
members.
understand that, they thought it was a good idea. I talked to the facilities chair and the chair of the school board, and they thought it was a good idea if we could make that work. And whether we take it or we just use it, that would be a great place. Especially if you're changing a lot of radios at one time and then you're kind of trailing off, we make it work something at the county garage. If we're not having to do everything at one time, but using that on a short-term basis. And that was it.
Yeah. One thing to keep in mind, that anytime that the county would take property from the schools, we would have to purchase it. There's general statute related to that, and we'd have to follow that process. I can't quote it to you off the top of my head, but there's a process for doing that.
But we will be doing their school buses, right?
We do their school
We do their
buses
school
first
buses
one.
now.
So they would be a shared purpose.
We would have to look at how the actual acquisition of land or property occurs, because of the fact that there is a state statute. It very clearly states that anytime the schools have excess property, we've had this discussion in the past, where before they could go out and actually sell it to someone else, we have right of first refusal. But that right of first refusal comes with having us to purchase it just as someone else would.
And is there ability to lease? from the
That I do
schools?
not know. That is something we would have to discuss with Mr. Crook and look at the state statutes.
Jeff, in this replacement radios, isn't that handhelds? Primarily handhelds, that's not the vehicle radios?
The majority of the radios are handheld, predominantly for the sheriff's office, some for fire. The majority in the sheriff's office is upgrading, where they also have GPS capability to be able to locate officers whenever they're away from the car. The other radios, as far as mobiles that are in the proposal, is replacing the mobile radios in the EMS units to be able to again have GPS that connects to their ABL capability in Canada.
So that 1.4 million is for the handhelds, except for the EMS radios?
Combination of the handhelds, again, law enforcement at the sheriff's office, and also some fire radios, and in addition, the mobile radios for EMS.
But the bulk are handheld radios, not?
The vast
Correct.
majority, yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I did have one more question. I'd sent a note about the Viper program with the state. We currently pay how much for radio service through, is it Mecklenburg or Charlotte, for radio service? You know something, Chris?
City of Charlotte, I don't remember the exact figure that we pay in the contract.
Would it be 600 to 700,000 maybe, in that range?
It very well may be.
Okay. The
And
Viper,
my understanding is it exists, Viper is a Motorola product.
right, the Viper program for the state, paid for by Homeland Security. I understand there's 11 towers that are available for Viper, and we currently have 7 towers. Is there a cost to the Viper program? Because I understand there's not a cost, or very little cost, and it's not a yearly.
And I'm not aware of that. I know you asked the question. I did speak to Curtis about that. We are evaluating the Viper system, but there are other ways for us to be compatible with the state system without going completely over to Viper with our existing. Viper is a Motorola product. It's not separate from Motorola. We do have an existing contract with Motorola that I think still has 2 years remaining on it. So we're going through the evaluation period as it relates to Viper. The Highway Patrol does in fact use Viper. Some counties use Viper, others do not. When it comes to a compatibility issue, that is something we are evaluating as to if our patrol officers or deputies leave Union County. In some counties, they may be on a different system, as to how do we ensure that they continue to have contact.
I believe I saw Mecklenburg County even uses the Viper system as a partner with it on the Viper website. So, yeah, if we could save $600,000–700,000 a year, that would be great.
Well, I think that the challenge in looking at the Cindy mentioned is that there's a 2-year period for that contract. So it's under evaluation. I don't think you're going to see in this process for the public radio, for the radio system in the 2018 budget, there's not going to be an opportunity to change that. So that process and evaluation process is going to take longer than the 18 budget.
Because I had heard it might be up this year. I just want to make sure that it is, that we take advantage of it.
So who would this radio replacement program go through? Motorola?
Mm-hmm.
So would that extend that contract farther than 2 years? New contract?
You're talking about two different things. The radio system is a contract with Charlotte, and the radio system itself. The radios we're talking about is a purchase of the units to be on the system. So they're independent of each other. Motorola is the primary provider of the handheld units, but they're also the primary provider of the equipment that the radio system is on. So whether you're talking about Viper or you're talking about the system we're on now, those are both Motorola systems. The handhelds are Motorola radios. It's a little confusing because they're both on both ends, but the handheld system, or the handheld radios themselves are not necessarily tied to Viper per se.
Well, given everything that we talked about just on the radio program, I'd like to see some type of analysis to see what makes sense, because if we don't know whether the radio is compatible with Viper and Mecklenburg uses Viper, or it is compatible, what's that cost? Is there a way to save money? Is there a way to use the towers better coverage before we spend,
Well, I'm afraid we're mixing two issues. And we can provide you with a lot more data. But the issues are, you have Motorola who provides us with our radios, and yes, we have radios that were bought at different times that are going to be obsolete. Regardless of which system you are on, they're going to be obsolete. They will no longer be warranted, or parts will be available through the manufacturer. As it relates to Viper, it is a Motorola product. What we are evaluating presently is, do we have to convert our entire system over to Viper to ensure that regardless of any one of our surrounding counties, we have a continuum of communication? Or are there other things that we can do without a wholesale conversion that will still meet that objective? And that's an evaluation that is going on now.
is that included as part of that budget, that conversion?
Not at this point in time, because I believe we still have 2 years under our existing contract under which.
But you said that radios were not going to be available after 2018 in the fall?
Motorola is going to stop supporting them. Each radio requires software and software updates and parts. Motorola said they're no longer going to provide software and software updates, and they're no longer going to manufacture parts. When you have that changeover period, however, as long as there are parts on the shelf at different facilities around the country and we can still purchase them, then we can continue to work on them. The challenge would be when those parts become scarce, because I'm sure we're not the only ones that are going to continue to run, essentially a run-out time period for those older radios. So what the money we're recommending does is it sets aside the sufficient funding as those start to age out and we're no longer able to fix or replace, that allows us to purchase the new ones. It's not a wholesale change out. We're not going to run out and buy $1.4 million worth of radios. It's as they come up, but you need to have the money available to be able to do that program over time versus trying to do it in smaller tranches on an annual basis. Because it's not based necessarily on what you want to replace, it's based on what you have to replace.
So since we don't have this information right now, why don't we table this? It can fall into next year's budget. We got to 2018.
We will provide you with the information that you requested prior to your public hearing, and then you all can make the determination as to what you choose to do.
Additionally, in public safety, we're recommending 5 new environmental health specialists. These will work on the on-site wastewater disposal as well as the drinking water program, and continue those inspections and help reduce the wait times for the permitting process. The fire funding, when we got to the fire funding, really what we looked at, keeping in mind the last 2 years, you have essentially frozen the fire funding. So when we got our request from the departments, as expected, there was a lot of pent-up demand in that process. So what we're recommending right now is kind of an interim solution to bridge from where we are with the frozen to the future, in that we know that the fire fee model doesn't really work. After this year, every fee district is going to be at $100, which is the max fire fee. So what we look at is, in this year, doing some interim funding, and then in the next year or two, working out a permanent funding solution. This is some of the detail you can see. Mineral Springs, we'll be looking at an increase of about 1.3 cents. Henry Bridge, 0.18, just under 0.2 tenths of a cent. You're looking at Waxhaw at a little over half a penny per 100, and all, like I said, all fee districts will go to $100. The biggest impact being in Jackson, where they'll go to 30, where they see an increase of 36.66. This is primarily driven by staffing cost increases within the fire departments of about $1.6 million. And the challenge there is that the fire departments are having trouble turning out volunteers a lot of times, and they want to ensure the services, particularly during the day, when folks are leaving, who would normally be there to respond, are leaving the county and going to their jobs. They don't have that, they're not employed in the area. So the departments across the board, with the exception of Griffith Road, are requesting that they have some form of coverage, whether that be daytime and in a couple instances nighttime coverage. And that takes the form of all different versions, from part-time, how they divvy that up, to 2 at night, then during the day, or 2 daytime, none at night kind of thing. So there's specifics in your book about who got, or who we're recommending to have what kind of staff. Also included in there is $995,000 for one-time items. When we sat down and kind of went through the capital funding request for the school, or for the fire departments, we looked and saw that there was a lot of pent-up demand for SCBA equipment. And this $995,000 primarily provides for those breathing apparatus. And in looking at that, and the largest chunk going to Stallings, several of these folks were up for replacement or were working on replacement when they were frozen. And that's kind of come now to the point where it necessitates a replacement. And we're recommending this be one-time funding out of the general fund. And I know there was some concern that we may be overfunding different units and different things. So what we're recommending as part of this process, and having talked to several of the fire departments that are involved that we're recommending these units for, is a reimbursement process, so that when they order and pay for their SCBA, then we would reimburse the actual cost versus the estimated price of that. We've bought units recently, but we purchased the units that we spec through our fire marshal's office. They may have a different expectation. And it was really important to us as we went through that process that we give the fire departments the autonomy to pick their equipment. We didn't want to dictate what specifically they purchase. We wanted to take their estimate and what type of equipment that they wanted to purchase and fund that as we could. So this $995 includes that. It also includes a couple of light duty vehicles, particularly in Fairview and Wingate, to provide additional support. There's also capital funding of $373,000 for apparatus payments. In past years, what you've seen from us is a recommendation to try to do cash funding for apparatus on a regular replacement cycle. In lieu of that this year, we're recommending including funding to purchase the apparatus and allow the fire departments to finance them themselves, but then providing support through the budget. Again, going back, we didn't want to come back and dictate what type of apparatus or what piece of equipment they purchase. We made an estimate about what the cost of that payment would be and put that into their budget. Several of them have some that are on order and coming in. Some will just start that process. So we accommodated those by putting that funding in. And that funding comes from the countywide tax and the local fees. The $995 is a one-time transfer from the general fund to kind of catch them up.
What is apparatus?
It could be any kind of, pretty much all the trucks. So a pumper, a ladder. I don't believe any ladders.
There were no ladders.
Tankers. They range from all different types of apparatus.
The documentation you gave us first, there was $567,000 in vehicle apparatus payments, either vehicle or truck payments.
Well, as far as I know, the 373 is all trucks. And in some cases, where they, for instance, were paying off a truck and they're picking up a new truck and continuing that payment, we didn't add any additional funding. So this is the new additional for payment. I don't believe anybody is financing a small light-duty vehicle. I think we paid for all of those with the, all of those are included in the 995. So
That was
that's,
80,025.
excuse
That was
me,
80,025 on those two vehicles.
I believe so. I have to go back and look. Just in detail.
Yes. There was some of the fire departments on the paper where they had what they requested, and what you recommending. And there was some that had requested less than we're recommending. Can you explain that? As I think Mineral Springs specifically was one of them, maybe that had a lower request than a recommendation.
What happened was, as we went through our process and met with them, at times some of the fire departments weren't sure how to include their request and pull that together. So in meeting with them, and we met a lot with the fire departments this year. I think several of them we had 3 meetings. I can't think of any that we didn't have at least one. Most of them we had at least 2. And what we found out during that process is that their original request wasn't complete, or that they weren't sure where to include something, so they included it at that meeting, or we clarified a request as we went through that meeting. So there was some of that cleanup kind of work done, and some of that rounding off the edges and working with the fire departments, because again, they're firefighters, so working with them, trying to get their financial requests together and be sure that it's complete and accurate. After we were done with that process, then we went through the determination of what the priority was and kind of how we worked that out. So you saw everything across the board. Some folks failed to put in their apparatus, some folks didn't put in their SCBA, for instance. They weren't sure where to put it. Some folks put in an entire station, some folks included payments for a station. It was all over the map. And our process kind of works from a generally specific way, that while we look at it across the entire system, because it is a system of firefighting, we try to work with the fire departments on an individual basis to try to address their specific need at their fire department. That's why when we look at, for instance, like SCBA, we don't necessarily want to dictate the brand and type and how many spare bottles and all those things. We want to work with the chief to find out what they think it's going to cost, put that in. Or on apparatus, we don't want to dictate to them what type of apparatus it is or what they need to put at their fire stations. We want to take them and what their opinion is of what they need and put that in. So we worked through that process. So then, as you were looking at what was originally recommended or requested by fire departments versus what was included, there's probably some of that gyration going on to ensure that everything that they need, particularly what came out of the conversation, is included. We did have requests of about $6 million in new stations and land for stations. And I think this is kind of an upcoming issue that we'll have to deal with as a county, particularly in the higher growth areas of Waxhaw, the Henry Bridge area, Stallings. But as soon as we find out about that, we'll have to develop a long-term strategy for how we're going to fund that.
Are we saving a substantial amount of money by buying the air packs in bulk, or buying a lot of them at one time?
In our conversations, and then this is all preliminary, particularly with the largest station in that group, Chief Porter over at Stallings, what we're looking at is using the HGAC co-op or some kind of purchasing cooperative, which is a bid process, and it's generally considered to be the lowest cost option to purchase those. Again, even through a co-op, there are different brands, there are different pieces, just like different configurations in how they do that. So again, we don't want to necessarily dictate to them specifically what that setup is. We want to be able to fund what they think that what they feel comfortable with and have it at their station.
But you know, Jeff, we had this conversation, and that particular Stallings, they were wanting 33 air packs. Came out $12,000 an air pack. And the consensus on major stations is that air packs were about $7,500 or less for a quality air pack. So there's $150,000 of overage there. That needs to be washed out before we put it in the budget.
Well,
because it's directly affecting a tax increase.
in this case, the SCBA is not driving the tax increase in the fire departments. The SCBA is funded through the one-time transfer. And having heard that concern, in talking with Chief Porter over at Stallings, what he's agreed to in talking with Curtis is that he will use the co-op pricing, and we will reimburse based on his actual expense, not based on what his estimated is at this point. Again, one of the big issues we had during the contract discussion that I believe we heard from everyone is that we did not want to get into the game of specifically dictating to the fire departments what type of equipment and apparatus and what kind of protective gear they had. They needed that individual flexibility across the 18 units, and that's what we tried to achieve through this process. If you take, for instance, if you were to take the 425 out of the equation, that's not going to have an impact on the 0.56 cent tax increase related to the fire tax. That's all one-time money out of the general fund. That money will just go back to the general fund balance if it gets unspent.
Fire funding has a bucket, and as long as we control what we spend in the bucket, less we have to do for that additional staffing. It needs to be accurate, and I don't know that I agree that one station can ask for a Lamborghini and another one asks for a Cadillac, and we're going to fund whichever they want. There needs to be a consistent quality standard that we fund that, so everybody's treated the same.
We had a lot of this discussion, as the board will recall, during contract negotiations. And it was clearly the direction that we received, that we will not, because we started out with a fairly constrict contract as it related to looking at what each of them paid, identifying what they purchased, and it was my recollection that the direction that we received is we granted those departments, since they are not for profit that we contract with, that they were to be granted a degree of individuality and anonymity as it related to that. So we did not go in and say, if you are buying an engine, you have to buy XYZ. If you are buying an air pack, you are buying this particular brand with either the microphone or not the microphone. So we did not go to that degree, and that was consistent with what the contract that we negotiated.
I do want to clear up one thing, because I think I don't want to get the 995 confused, because this is an important component. If particularly talking about the air pack money, if you reduce the 995, that does not reduce the fire tax rate. If you were to try to take the 995 funding and push that into staffing costs, what you will do is create an unsustainable model, because that is one-time funding for ongoing costs, and that's what we're trying to avoid. So in trying to catch up, we propose putting that one-time funding in for one-time items. So in that discussion, I just want to be real clear. That 995 there's no relationship from that 995 to the tax rate. That is to catch them up and to get them on essentially catch up those pieces of equipment which are one time. The personnel pieces are ongoing, and you're going to see that cost again next year. And if you reduce that out, you wouldn't have a funding source to pay for the ongoing staffing component. So you would either have to get it this year or get it next. Is that
same apply for apparatus and buildings?
For the payments, these are ongoing payments. Mm-hmm. So this would allow them, that's built into the tax rate. So that would allow them, as they go out then, to continue to make that payment over the life, depending on the piece of apparatus, it's 7 to 10 years. And then the buildings, we don't have anything included at this point. Take that back. We have a little bit of money for Mineral Springs to do some renovation, I believe, in their facility, but it's not very much money at all. The $6 million is just the number everybody asked for this year. We have not included this funding anywhere, and this probably will be a 20-year, 25-year cost to the fire departments, because those are buildings. Those are hard infrastructure. And what we're pointing out here is this was a big part of the request this year, and we believe that we need to address that coming up. So whatever final solution we come to on sustainable fire funding, there's a myriad of options. We need to be sure that whatever that solution does provides a means or provides a tool to be able to fund those stations as necessary.
To go back to the original statement, when they had the requests and they were similar equipment, I know we didn't specify what they could buy, but did we do some type of rationalization to make sure that if they were asking for the air packs, that the cost between the two stations were at least similar?
Well, because, but they're different type of air packs, there are different brands, there are different upgrades you can provide to an air pack. For example, a more rural fire department may say, we don't need the ability to have an earpiece in our helmet for communication purposes. Other of the districts may very well make that determination. So we did look at the cost of the apparatus and things like that and say, is it within the general scope of what X would cost? We did that evaluation and said yes. When Commissioner Helms brought forward the concern as it related to air packs, specifically I think as it related to Stallings, we went to Stallings and we went and told all of the departments that for air packs, the $995,505, that we will do that on a reimbursement basis. So that is not money that goes directly to them. They will buy their air packs, they will seek reimbursement from us, and we will pay the actual cost. And as Jeff indicated, anything that is left over out of that $995 that is not spent for that specific purpose will go to our fund balance.
Have we approached the fire departments to see if there can be some type of standardization? So while the rural departments don't want it, maybe it's something that can be offered at a equal price if we consolidate our purchasing. Have we approached the departments for that?
We have not.
And this is, of course, this is the detail across the spectrum of the funding structure. I'll point out, when you look at this, there's a little over $13 million in total fire funding. The fire department is specifically bringing about $223,000, and that's on their side of the ledger that they actually raised through fundraising, through municipal contracts, through a number of different venues. The countywide tax rate revenue at $1.04 is right around $2.5 million, almost 2.6. The localized fee and tax revenue is still the bulk of your funding, and that comes from the $100 fees and the tax rates individually. That's about $8.1 million. The sales tax allocation I mentioned earlier is about $1.1 million. And the fund balance, and this is fund balance at the individual tax district funds. And what we did in most cases is push that to capital reserve for one-time items, because again, you want to match ongoing revenue with ongoing uses. With the exception, I believe, not at Wesley Chapel, and their growth generally catches up with them in that process, so they tend to exceed their estimates, and this is a way to help them with that process. The general fund balance, again, then you can see specifically who's getting, who has those different components. Griffith Road, for instance, I believe that's just a couple of air packs. Then $35,000. New Salem is, I want to say it's a vehicle, and then you can see Wing It down here. So those are the components of the more of the detail. There's a lot of detail in your document related to that, and we can absolutely answer any questions you have related to fire funding.
And what was the expenditure for the current year?
This year's budget, I believe,
Commissioner, in response to your question, one of the reasons, I mean, we will have general discussion with them as it relates to when they're buying apparatus and that, because of some of the historical perspective we have in looking at other stations. But it's a fine balance for staff as it relates to what the contract speaks to, where we may exert authority and where we may not. And we try to be very sensitive to that overall balance. And you will recall there was a lot of discussion during contract negotiation as to where do you draw that line, with the thought that in future years and future contract negotiations that may change, but based upon where we are right now, they still do have a large degree of independence.
And I would agree with that. I mean, we all talked about them being able to purchase the trucks the way they wanted to do those things. But in that circumstance, we're talking about their fire fee or their fire tax. In this circumstance, we're talking about general fund, our dollars that we're providing to them.
Right.
This is not anywhere advocated or allocated to fire tax or funding.
But the
This
reason
is
we
general
did that
tax
was to hold down
Right.
the countywide fire tax, because they were for one-time items. So we did not want for that tax to go up to purchase that.
I
And
understand.
since we had fund balance, it seemed like an appropriate use of fund balance to kind of keep
But
as
I
level
would
a
say
playing field
probably
as
in that
possible.
circumstance, we'd have the ability to more ask that they be,
Yes, and that's why when we approached them as it related to the air packs, I'm not aware of anyone that has said no, that it's not an acceptable solution, because yes, it is coming from the general fund. It is not part of either their fee or their tax district or their fund balance that they may have.
And to answer your question, about 10.5 million of ongoing last year. When you include, it depends how you include the localized revenue of the fire departments. And there's also some fund balance usage, because remember, we had some pent-up demand over a couple of years where we froze them and didn't allow the fund balances to go back to them. So several of those tax districts have fairly large fund balances that we then distributed out that went into last year's budget. So it's right around that $10 million, 10.5 million. You definitely saw an increase this year. And we, on the staffing, for instance, I believe we granted about half, between a third and a half of the staffing in most cases. Again, based on what that was requested. So
I think you saw about a $2.5 million increase between last year and this year in the appropriation.
Primarily driven by the one-time
Staffing.
equipment costs and staffing.
Yes, I would say that the vast majority really was staffing, because the equipment cost is we are paying, we are funding their ongoing debt service. And so it's over multiple years, and in most cases, there were a few that were significant based upon if they had to replace an engine or something like that. But the staffing, I think, added an additional $1.5 million. I would like to, so that was a pretty large piece of the recommendation.
well, and going through that process too, because I know one of the discussions that we've had is how you standardize pay across the 18 fire departments. And part of that discussion, we had a lot during the contract negotiation, was there definitely was a feeling on the fire department side that they did not want us to dictate their pay scale, pay structure, how that worked. So you don't have a mechanism right now in your contract to be able to dictate pay rates. So they pay across the spectrum at the different, depending upon, some of your more rural fire districts pay by call, pay by run, pay on call, pay. There's all different compensation types, all the way to almost some that pay by the hour, and almost a full-time firefighters at different places. So the staffing, the recommended staffing increase provides based on their individual fire department's requests, needs, and how they intend to staff their station.
Did we recommend or approve in this proposal anything above and beyond what they requested?
Is it from a staffing perspective?
Or equipment?
I would say no, but to Commissioner Rushing's question earlier is through the dialogue with the departments, there were some things they didn't know how to request them in the budget. So Curtis, Jeff, and I met with them initially. Then there was a follow-up meeting between Jeff and Curtis, sometimes once, twice, and sometimes more often than that, to ensure that if they had a need, that we were addressing it. So in some cases, and this is not meant to be disrespectful, but these individuals are firefighters. They know how to run their department. They know what they need. But as it relates to the appropriate accounting terms and where to put it in the budget, so we were kind of helped guide them in some cases where they talked about the air packs. Well, I need air packs, but I didn't know where to put it in this line item budget. And so, in my opinion, we didn't provide them with anything that wasn't needed based upon those discussions, or that they did request, whether on the piece of paper or verbally during our discussions.
And keeping in mind, we have a full spectrum of really small, one station, all volunteer, like Griffith Road, for instance, to the larger stations. You see Chief McQuinn in the back. You have Henry Bridge. You have Wesley Chapel. You have Waxhaw. Those stations, which more operate almost like a full unit, so our full-time firefighting force. So really trying to shepherd them through that process. We really tried to tailor our process to meet the needs of the individual fire department, have that communication with them. Because sometimes you do have to draw it out of them and be sure that they have everything accounted for. Because the worst thing you want is to get halfway through the year. We've had this happen where we didn't realize we were supposed to ask for it that way. but we've ordered it, it's here, what do we do now? Or we need it, our truck's no longer functioning, what do we do now? And we don't want to get in that situation. So we really tried to be proactive and have an open dialogue with them through this process. And I think for the most part, not all of them are happy with what they received or recommended, but everyone feels like they had that dialogue and were able to have that discussion and at least get their needs out on the table, which I know in the past hasn't necessarily been the case. So.
Were all staffing requests honored?
No, they were not. Continuing on, we're recommending.
Do you have a question?
I was just going to say, help me understand if there's a need for staffing, why we didn't honor it.
Well, I will use Waxhaw as an example. The Waxhaw chief came to us and wanted to add, I don't know what the FTE was, but something like 6 new full-time equivalent positions, and which was almost $1 million increase in cost. We actually we went back and looked at, okay, what are their call volumes? You know, how many times have they not been able to respond to a call? So we did an analysis as to what do we believe that they need next year in order to be able to serve their community. And we made a recommendation based upon that.
And then also, is that 393 apparatus, is that's going to be an ongoing every year?
Right, that's built into the half-cent tax increase to be able to cover the 0.56 tax increase to be able to cover that cost ongoing year after year. So that's, as I was talking about, two kind of ways to look at it. There's that one-time purchase, one-time funding unit. Those don't have any impact on the tax rate. But the vehicle apparatus payments, the apparatus payments, they do have an ongoing cost. And we've estimated the life 7 or 10 years depending upon the type of apparatus. And use the prevailing bank rates at the time because, of course, there's a large lead in. When you order a truck, it takes time to get here, and the financing rates will be whatever it is when they go to sign the contract. Are there any other questions? Okay. We're recommending continuing public safety. We're recommending 4 social services positions. This will help cover after hours. Currently, we don't have after hours coverage, and those folks are on callback. And then also expected to come during the day and do their shift, and I think it's causing a significant stress and strain on the staffing over there. Also included in this is some foster care caseworkers and so forth. Human services, senior financial analysts. One of the things that we don't have in that area is someone dedicated to working with the state and working with the federal funding dollars. It's a very complex structure because every little piece is funded in different percentages and different reimbursement rates, and this will help maximize the addition of this position over there to focus on the reimbursements will help us maximize the reimbursement back to the county and help us eventually save money. And there's no way to estimate what that savings is at this point, but as we go through that process, they'll help address that. Plus, they'll provide support and supervision for some of their window operations and some of their more business-oriented operations, not necessarily direct service provision. We're also recommending 9.96 positions in the sheriff's office. Again, that's a fully loaded, the 962, almost 963, includes vehicles as well. 4 patrol deputies. This would be essentially 1 per shift. 2 detention officers. One of the things that the sheriff is having a challenge with is that they use the jail as kind of a training ground. So they're bringing in essentially deputies that may not be ready to go out and be patrol deputies, but need to go through that training. They need to go through the different components. So they're using the positions at the jail to start them through that process. With that, and with vacation, FMLA, and all the different components, they're having trouble continuing to maintain a regular staffing or the minimum number of staffing or minimum number of positions at the jail at different hours in the day. So this would allow them to do that. A community relations manager, this is a spokesperson. There's a person functioning in this position already. That's the primary contact for the media and also provides their social network and electronic media campaigns. South Providence SRO. If you were to look around, you would see that all of our middle schools and all of our high schools have SROs. But South Providence is really a high school and middle school in one, and we have 1 SRO out there, and they have their challenge. There's some different challenges at that school. So to be able to ensure the safety of the students as well as the SRO that is there, the sheriff's requested we add a position. And just to remind you, the SRO program, we fund that directly to the sheriff's department, and the sheriff assigns those SROs. And I believe this would bring us to 19, if I remember right, school resource officers. Fraud investigator, of course, with the increase in phishing and increase in scams, we're seeing an increase in the necessity for fraud investigations. So that's driving that. And then about just under a position of other office support staff, procurement, training with the new firing range. They're going to add some training hours through part-time staff and so forth. Community consensus, working through, remember this is looking at the community and how do we build programs to address what the community expects from us and kind of strengthening that relationship. One of the things we've been working with the schools and community services through the LEAD program, librarians and educators and as partners. And the community services librarian will help continue that program. It's been successful. They've been working on it this year, but they don't have anyone dedicated to be able to provide those community services and direct services, outreach services in the library. Library improvements of about $503,000. This includes the shelving, carpeting, and a bunch of different components, and this includes some prior year funding that hasn't been done yet at the library and the Monroe Library. About $283,000 for park improvements. This includes improvements at Cane Creek, a floating dock, and ADA improvements, an ADA floating dock, and then also pavilions at Jesse Helms Park on the pads that we put in this year. The historic courthouse, Michael has been working on the contract, and you guys received a presentation on the needs of the historic courthouse. This will help button up the envelope while we determine what the next phase of that project would be. About $2.5 million for the Board of Elections. This comes in two parts. There's about $800,000 in there for voting machines. The state said we're no longer going to be allowed to use the voting machines we own. They have yet to certify voting machines. As soon as they do, though, we think it's going to cost about $800,000 to go out and buy the new certified voting machines. And I know John's been working on this. I think this is our third year we've included this recommendation in the budget, but the state has yet to certify them. He also has some challenges in adding precincts, and I believe we're going to end up adding about 15 new precincts, precinct workers, equipment, and everything else. And that's about, between all of that, that's about $2.5 million. We put about $1.3 million into a reserve for contingency out of fund balance, so that if the state, depending on what the state does and the change in administration, if all the changes come to fruition, it could cost us the 1.3. If those don't come to fruition, then we won't spend the 1.3. So keeping it over in reserve allows us to wait and see what happens. And if it doesn't get spent for that purpose, then it'll just fall back to the fund balance and not be part of their annual budget.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question before here? The Board of Elections seems to be pretty packed in. With the library improvements and the Board of Elections, is there any ability to...
We're doing a space study on Board of Elections right now. We've got an RFP on the street to look what their space needs are.
Okay, so but as we do anything with the library, is there, I mean, there's not very much way to expand that, is there?
Well, the discussions that I have had with John Whitley is that, you know, they've got a fairly decent footprint there, but so much of it is associated for storage purposes. So the consultant that we're looking for is going to look at what are their office needs and what are their storage needs. And a potential solution may be, I don't know, but may be saying, okay, we may need to take some of your warehouse space, convert it to office, and then have an off-site warehouse space for you. So I think with them being at that location, it's probably an appropriate location, but that's why we're hiring someone who's very objective and going to look at it and say, okay, what are their short-term and long-term needs? But if you've taken a tour of their building, you know that there's a lot of stuff in the hallways, but it is all, a lot of it is from a storage perspective, so.
Okay.
Go ahead. One question. On the 2.46, you have that in the current budget, but there's also another 1.3 in the reserve.
1.3 is included in that 2.46. So the largest chunk of that, about 1.3 of the 2.5 is that reserve. And then there's 800,000 included, so 2.1 between the voting machines and the reserve. And then there's about 300,000 for the additional precinct costs, which we know we're going to have. Because what we did is we worked with John Willie and said, okay, what are the unknowns the what ifs. Let's put those aside into one group, and what are the actually knowns that we're fairly certain are going to happen. And that's how we try to divvy it up, because otherwise you'd be looking at $2.5 million increase in just as a full operating budget, and we didn't want to jump all the way into that on a what if. So this is if it all does come to fruition, this will allow us then the next year to try to figure out how to kind of make that more permanent.
So when was the 1.3 reserved?
It's recommended as a reserve for contingency, meaning it's a contingent appropriation. So if they need it, Cindy will be allowed to transfer that over to their use. If they don't need it, then it'll stay in the reserve for contingency until the end of the year, in which time it will fall back to the fund balance.
But it's reserved in the 17 budget.
No, it'll be in the 18 budget. It's a reserve for contingency, so it's a budget reserve, not an accounting reserve, which I think is what you're thinking. It's not a technical reserve like you'd see on your balance sheet. It's appropriated or allocated. So you would see it on the balance sheet from an allocated perspective, not a restricted reserve perspective like what you're thinking the accounting aspect of it. The Ag Center Events Coordinator. The one thing that we have, and we're seeing a lot more use at the Ag Center, but we really don't have the necessary resources to continue to book and do that work out there. So we're recommending that there's an Ag Center Events Coordinator. And you remember, the ag community uses that facility without cost, but everyone else pays to use that facility, and in trying to provide that customer service and that level of expertise, we're proposing having someone out there dedicated to the events coordinator job. And then a community information officer. One of the challenges we have is continuing through trying to work in the community and communicate with them. And this position will help us in that process, media campaigns, constructing our strategy, and also help us bring that information to understanding for the public. And I think that and that's included in this year's record.
Jeff, can I ask a question about that Ag Center coordinator?
Sure.
Is that individual to be on site? You currently have, what, one and a half people now?
You have 1 1/2, and yes, it's to be kind of like Ron and the part-time person is right now, to where not only they're during the day working with customers who want to reserve the center, et cetera, but during the events, we always have someone that is there to ensure that the systems operate appropriately, that there aren't any issues.
So this
yes.
person would be there on the weekends as well?
Yes, sir.
And what impact is, I believe we're moving toward a mechanized system already?
Yes, a
Online
reservation
system of
system.
booking?
Yes, at the Ag Center, as Parks and Rec, as well as Library, that system will be used on all three. So it's probably using the resources a little bit differently. Right now, we have a very manual system at the Ag Center as it relates to reservations, which sometimes make it very difficult if the primary person is not there, for someone else to figure out who has reserved what. So this will be something that will be transparent to all that are looking at up to see that who has it reserved, for what period of time, etc. I'm sure you've seen maybe the calendar, maybe not.
Oh, yeah, I was just looking at it, would appear to me that would streamline the process.
It might streamline the reservation process so that everyone knows when the facility is reserved. I think it'll provide some transparency there. But where we see a number of the hours are consumed or during the events themselves, where we have someone there while someone is actually using the facility, and the primary person right now has unbelievable amount of compensatory time built up because of the amount of time that they're spending at the facility. And so we really do believe we need additional resources there for that primary purpose.
Do the event costs cover that?
You probably generate between $80,000 and $100,000 per year for rental of the facility based upon our existing rental rates. So does it cover the cost of running the center? No, it does not. But I will tell you, you do not build those type of centers for them to be a break even or even a cost generator. They are a community asset.
On the community information officer, how much do we spend on the consultant this year?
Probably about $70,000, $70,000, $60,000 to $70,000. Yes.
That's the one we turned down last year because we've got 2 people doing it now, right?
No, you have one person who You have one person, Brett, who primarily is handling the technical aspect of communications. He does, handles taping of our meetings, putting that information out there, but as it relates to a communication strategy, as it relates to how we go about with respect to our social media campaign, we have been paying a consultant to come in and assist us in those endeavors. So right now you have one person, and we have been paying a consultant, Mr. Francis, to assist us in those
See,
endeavors.
you want to do the new website.
He did not do the website, he assisted us with the website.
Okay.
Continuing on, the third objective is continuing the economic development. We're recommending we continue on with our relationship with the Union County, our Monroe Union County Economic Development, so you don't see that up here necessarily. But when we look at economic development, it's more than just our contract or our work with Chris Patel and his group. We look at our relationship with several of the other entities as being part of the economic development process. In this case, South Piedmont Community College, and I told Michelle when she came in not to get too excited about the $5.4 million because that includes bond money.
Poor Dr. Farr.
That's right. And Dr. Farr came in after we started, so I wanted to be sure you're not getting all of the $5.4 million. That includes the initial tranche of the funding for the to start the debt service reserve for the voter-approved GO bonds. What we are recommending is 2 additional IT support positions, $475,000 for their IT capital and maintenance, IT capital and maintenance agreements, $171,000 for their capital maintenance, and we finally caught them up. And if you remember, the last couple of years we've had fairly significant tranches of funding going for capital maintenance. So we finally got them in a fairly good position where this is probably going to be more of an ongoing funding structure. About $155,000 of safety and security improvements. I believe it was last year they brought in a new safety or a security officer at SBCC, and he's continuing to make recommendations on how to improve student safety and facility safety, and that provides for that funding. And then $40.2 million of voter-approved GO bonds. And just a reminder that passed with almost 60%. And part of that $5.4 million is the part of the debt reserve, and we'll go into more detail about that in a few minutes. But part of the debt reserve that's related to those GO bonds. Also, as part of economic development objectives, providing a sustainable utility system and continuing to maintain the utility system. You met as the Board of Governors earlier tonight and talked about the rates. All of these would fit within the rate structure that's been recommended to you. And they primarily focus on system maintenance and system sustainability. You see the instrument control technician, senior utility mechanic locator. And again, these are fully loaded costs where they require a vehicle that's included. Utility mechanic and customer service specialist. This is to help provide direct customer service. Water and wastewater operations manager. This is continue to help manage that service. And then a land acquisition and public works attorney. One of the things as we change out our legal counsel, or look to change our legal counsel with the retirement of Ligon, is looking at how we do our land acquisition, right-of-way acquisition, and management process. And it's recommended that we bring in-house an attorney to work with that process. And we have a lot of little pieces of right-of-way, a lot of little pieces of land acquisition that we go through, and this would help support that.
Does that come out of their fund balance, not the county's?
All of this is supported by the rates.
So that's really doesn't hit our general fund.
This has no impact on your tax rate. All of this would come out of the utility.
Okay.
And again, that's why I mentioned this is all included in the recommended rate structure for the utility. Part of that process too then is the funding for UCPS. When you include everything in the equation, it's $162.2 million of UCPS and related UCPS costs. This does not include the SROs, but this does include their debt service and all the other components. So you see about $42 million of debt service. We're recommending $97.3 million of current expense funding. And this is a breakout of how we'd see that. The charter school funding is going up quite a bit. And they're seeing an expected actual decline in their student population. However, if you remember, we fund education in Union County, not just the public school. They happen to be the mechanism we pass it through and back to the charter schools. So when we talk about the 97.3, that's the current expense funding for all the students in Union County, not just those at UCPS. $18.5 million funding million for capital. That includes a number of different pieces. Their ADA program, about $2 million. Building systems and components, about $3.4 million. Expansions and mostly renovations, including flooring and those kinds of things, of about $7.6 million. The STEM lab and their partnership with Carolina's Healthcare of about $1.9 million. And we're recommending this funding come from the fund balance of the school's tax. Remember, you always have a little bit each year that we put to a one-time project that's not really maintenance-oriented or renovation, but as an addition. I think last year was Benton Heights. That renovation project was included. This is that same type of funding, about $2 million of that money. Information technology, furniture, and equipment, about $1.6 million. Safety and security, about right around $960,000, and that includes alarm systems, fire alarms, code changes, those kinds of things. And then the roofing program. And this is going to be used, I believe, this upcoming year for roof audit. And I think there's a little bit of confusion and discussion about the Newtown roof and the money from there being used for that audit. And in our discussions with the superintendent, there's not an expectation on their side that they'd be able to use the money from the Newtown roof to perform the audit, but that this would be, this year, the funding for the roofing will go toward doing that roofing audit and get a maintenance plan in place. And I want to mention the $18.5 million. We had a lot of discussion over the last few years about how much this number should be annually. About right around $16 million of this is supported through the tax rate. Again, the remainder is supported through fund balance. And I think the challenge is that you have a different administration or a new administration, and they are going through the process of kind of working through those maintenance plans and trying to figure out what their long-term capital program is going to be. And while not every piece is new and kind of different, you want to keep this capacity in place, because in the next couple of years, as they renovate or as they redo their capital plan and come back to you, you want to ensure that you have a mechanism or a funding source to provide for that ongoing capital funding. The challenge, if you remember going all the way back to the 2014 budget year, is that the county didn't have a set aside or have any funding that we were regularly putting into capital. And then that in turn got us behind and had to put a board in a position to have to raise the tax rate about 10 cents to be able to provide that necessary capital funding. So our recommendation is to continue this funding while they continue to try to work through their long-term capital plan. And I think that, again, going back to what I said earlier, is this budget's about looking forward into the next few years and setting the foundation so that we can continue and have an ongoing source. And that's what that 18.5 provides. There's about $3.7 million of GO debt reserve that we part of that bond. If you remember, keeping in mind they were the highest approval rate at 70.94% in that debt service. Mr. Chairman, or the GO election.
The 18.5 in the capital funding, after we started our discussions on what was going to happen, I went to the chairman of the school board and the chairman of the facilities committee and had a meeting with them. They showed an interest and had a belief that they could use that existing capital funding to offset the cost of the school bonds. They're looking at ways now of doing that, not putting off or deleting projects except for the roofing, which used to be $3 million. They're using the savings from the roofing that they're going with the warranty work now, and they're looking at using the existing capital to offset the cost of that. So I don't know if I mentioned it to you guys in passing, but I think there's a great interest in that. I've spoken to a majority of the school board members, and they're also interested in looking at that.
We met with the superintendent on Thursday. He has received no direction from his board the budget's been submitted to us, and it was a unanimous decision of the BOE. So he has not received any direction from them to make any modifications. The concern that I would have is that if they were to say, we need less capital this year, and you absorb that, what do you do next year? What do you do the year after that? Because my concern is that you're going to place a future board, may even be this board, in the same position that 3 members of this board were put into a couple of years ago, to where a prior board, even though the voters approved the bond issue, overwhelmingly approved, it was indicated, as was this bond issue, that there would be a tax increase. And so you are putting that responsibility on further down the road to pay for that debt. I believe the voters understood when they voted for the referendum that they knew that there was a tax increase associated with that referendum.
And I'll say this, not by any means saying take the 18.5 away. They're just saying that they can shift projects around, extend periods, and get to that point. So they're pretty confident that they can live within that 8.5 million and do that. I think they had spent approximately $8.5 million. The vice chairman said that they had spent approximately $8.5 million so far this year. So
And they spend, but you still have probably 3 months worth of invoicing that they haven't seen yet.
And they realistically believe that they're probably going to be able to spend probably 13, maybe $14 million. But still, that leaves some money and some room that they can extend out projects to be able to cover those costs. And also, the voters didn't expect us to have about, according to Jeff's first page here, one of the first pages, over $12 million of additional revenue. So there's some, I believe in good faith that the school board has worked with us. One thing that they do want to see from us is the ability that we're going to also look at our budget and make a commitment to try to hold off a tax increase, because they believe in being responsible just like we do.
And I understand, my only concern is you are using, the bond issue will be 20 or 25 year payback?
Probably be 20 years.
20 year payback, so it is an ongoing cost.
Right.
If you use one-time money to pay for ongoing costs, eventually you will
How
put
many
yourself in a
years have we
situation.
scheduled that $18.5 million? Every year we plan that out for.
That is planned
in
for
their
every
tax
year.
rate.
So what you would do effectively, and there's a little more discussion later in the presentation about what the real impact of that tax rate is.
It's more than, yeah.
It's more than 3.7 million. I'd also caution you, and I'd leave it to Jeff to tell us when we need to probably go and talk about this, not out here, that the statute suggests or says that you're to take their request as they voted on it as a board and consider it on your side to kind of go back and try to negotiate that. I think there was some concern in that process, and we may want to have a little bit further conversation about that when they haven't, as a board, come to you and said that we were trying to do that. So, but I want to.
Would you like to do it for this meeting or a future meeting?
We can have some of that conversation, but I think if we could hold that conversation on the debt, there's a larger discussion of debt because it's multifaceted. So I have more discussion on that coming later in the presentation.
You mentioned Newtown. So where is the savings from Newtown showing up in the budget? It's just sitting there right now, correct?
That would be correct. So they haven't come back with a recommendation on where to put that. You as a board will have to make that appropriation. So at some point in the future, when they are to the point where they feel comfortable in moving that money or requesting to move that money, it'll have to come back to you as a board to make that decision.
So at the very least, there's a $500,000 offset to the 18.5.
Again, one-time money in the ongoing pool. So, and we didn't necessarily get into with Dr. Julian about what they intend to do with that. We asked the question because we had heard the question about what is that part of that roofing, or is the roofing audit going to be paid for out of the Newtown funds? So we can certainly ask that question and see what they intend to do with that. But that would have to come back to me.
Well, given the roofing audit is a one-time fund and the savings is a one-time fund, that would be a good fit for the offset.
Well, in that case, as Tony mentioned, or Commissioner Rushing mentioned, there was $3 million in their ongoing program for roofing maintenance. When you get that roofing audit, it's going to tell you what the maintenance cost is going to be. So I would probably think that $1 million, while this year they're using it for that audit, in the upcoming year and the years following, you're going to have a need for a roofing maintenance program. So if you were to take one-time money, reduce the roofing maintenance program, next year you won't have any funds, or you won't have ongoing money to pay for the ongoing roofing maintenance program. And that was kind of the trap we fell into going back into the 8, 9, 10 time frame, is using, not having ongoing sources to pay for those capital projects, particularly when it came to the roofs. That became the challenge, so you would have to find ongoing funding then to go with that roof maintenance program. So this would be consider this the first in that process of establishing that program, but you're going to probably need money for that going forward.
I think what Commissioner Lance was saying is that they have 500 left over from last year to do the program, the audit, and then that $1 million is not unreasonable probably for continued maintenance if the roofs are not on warranty. Of course, by now, not all of them should be on warranty, if not a new warranty. So you have you have $1 million, that's fine, but they had $3 million before. So they've saved at least $2 million per year just on the roofing program. Shifting it somewhere else doesn't,
But I don't know that we know that yet, and I applaud them for actually doing an audit, because unfortunately, I wish they had done it sooner. But by doing an audit, my concern would be, I think we need to await the results of the audit, in which it will identify on an annual basis how much money they need to put towards roofing, and then we will have a solid number as to what to build a budget upon. At this point in time, I'm not sure they can articulate that, and I don't know that we have any idea as to what the ongoing costs will be.
The STEM lab's one-time money, right?
That is fund balance money, so that
That's
would be
one time, correct? $2 million one time?
Right.
But that's not coming out of the tax rate. That is money that, the fund balance from fiscal year 16.
The ADA programs, is that a reasonable say? I know there's going to be some ongoing, but that's...
Every year we see ADA projects.
Right, but I mean...
If you were to look at over their 5-year plan, which they're continuing to work on, there's ADA included in every year. So they have, their plan over a 5-year period is probably somewhere between $16 and $20 million, and that's not unreasonable to expect given the size of the number of facilities they have and the size of facilities and the square footage. What I think that Cindy's concern is that they do require ongoing funding, and if you were to take that and draw that down and use that for something else or to offset that with it, and you would say came in at $10 million for ongoing funding, there's going to be that $6 to $10 million gap that right now there's no sources for to fund, and you're going to get back into the trap that we saw from the late 2000s, that there was no ongoing money for that maintenance. There was no way to provide for that without a tax increase, and that just pushes into a future board then to have to raise that tax rate, when right now you're sitting with a referendum that was passed by 71% of the voters with the language, and we'll cover this in a few minutes, that said we approve the tax rate to go with the debt.
But what they didn't approve is 51 new positions in the county. What they didn't approve is spending that we're going to be doing. So what I'm saying is it's all goes into the same pot at the end of the day. So if it's $500,000 for a roofing program, if it's $2 million saved on roofing, all this goes into the same pot of money, and it goes into the big tax rate that we all pay. So I got what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. We're not talking about taking anything away from them. They're talking about reorganizing their projects, stuff like that. And I applaud them for doing it. I think they've done a good job. I think that it's logistically almost impossible sometimes to spend that much money, especially when you have a $54 million infusion of projects as well. So they've got a lot of projects coming up. Will they be actually able to do all the projects in the time period that they're doing? And that's what they're looking at. They're not sure that they can accomplish all the projects in a year's time that they're going to have to do, especially on top of the
And they probably won't, and neither do we. Most of them can be multi-year projects, but when they in fact sign a contract, even if it's a multi-year project, when they sign the contract, they're attesting to the fact that they have the funds to pay for that contract. So whether it's expended within that 12-month period or it takes 18 months or 24 months to pay out, it's like our human services building. When we signed that contract, we knew we weren't going to spend $25 million in a single year. We knew it was going to be over multiple budgets, but we had to have that monies available to us in order to, it has to be pre-audited.
Over the last 3 years, how much have they spent on roofs each year, on average?
I'd have to go back and look specifically, because it varies from maintenance programming to, I know it's been right around that $3 million number for maintenance, and then there's been specific roof replacement projects. Again, they have a lot of roofs, so I'd have to go back and look specifically. But there's not much not under contract from all the funds that we've set aside.
I've got 5:29. Let's take a 5-minute recess. All right, we'll reconvene the meeting now.
Okay, if there's no other questions on schools, we will go ahead and move on then to addressing sustainability. If you remember back, the strategic objectives that we talked about just a few minutes ago, we've covered public safety, community consensus, economic development, and now we're going to talk about sustainability. And I think sustainability as a topic, while these other objectives are kind of have a measurable, direct, programmatic link, and you can see program A and how it provides community consensus, or program B and how it provides public safety, sustainability really becomes more of an underlying philosophical basis then for the budget process. We can do things that help us to be sustainable, but we also plan in a way that makes us sustainable. And as we go through this, we're going to talk more about some global issues related to sustainability, and that's kind of where we focus our budgeting process. So everything that we've included in the budget, we believe is sustainable and provides a sustainable basis for moving forward. So you can see the recommended tax rates. This is the only time that you'd see them all together. The schools tax is recommended to remain level. The general government tax recommended to remain level. The voter-approved GO tax, which we'll talk more about in just a moment, is recommended to be 3.09 cents. If you remember, that's down from about 3.15 cents in our original estimates. A couple of things have happened since we did our initial runs last year at this time. The market has changed on us a little bit. Our tax base has changed, as well as what's been included in those and some of the different factors. The EMS tax rate is recommended to remain the same. And then the countywide fire tax we talked about is recommended to go about 0.56 cents. And we talked in pretty detail about what is driving that increase. You saw this during the projections process. You normally would see this as a 5-year block, but so I can make it so you can read it from your seats and not so micro. We've run it out 3 planning years. And you remember, if you look across the sensitivity line, as long as we're right around 3%, excluding the proposed year, and I'll talk about that in just a moment, as long as we're right around 3% going out into the future, we're fairly confident that we are in balance at a sustainable point. What you see in this $5.4 million, almost 5.5, is the recommended use of fund balance for those one-time capital items and those one-time items like the 995, the reserve, the $1.3 million reserve for contingency for the for elections, and so forth. So when you see that balance number down here being negative, meaning more revenue than expenditure, and or in this case positive, meaning more expenditure than revenue, that is a use of fund balance. We believe then, based on our modeling, that what you have in front of you is sustainable. I will point out, because I think there's a lot of discussion around this, for instance, in 2016, actual revenue against actual expenditures, it ended up about $9.6 million. And that really amounts to about, I want to say about $5 million on the revenue side and about $3 to $4 million, $4.5 million on the expenditure side. What we do to help keep the tax rate low in the following year is we use that savings then to fund capital. So that $4.2 million is funded out of the prior year savings. Part of this prior year savings is helping us then to fund the $5.5 million of one-time costs. If you didn't use that program of using your prior year savings, you would have to, as a board, have to have a tax rate then to support your capital program. What this allows us to do is scale the capital program up and down based on the available funding. It's allowed us to, for instance, build the firing range. You've been able to build the firing range without having to incur debt and meet that need for the sheriff. We're able to do a lot of the projects that we have and ongoing, the capital projects we have then without incurring debt because they remain in that $4 to $5 million range. And we know that we have needs across the county for facilities, for different pieces. So if we were to cut this, for instance, let's say we reduce the tax rate so that we didn't have that savings every year, and we assumed that, which is referred to as budgeting for attrition, we budgeted for the savings. That would put us in a position then to not have the capital funding going forward. And that, much like the school situation, would necessitate not an ongoing funding source then for capital. So we do keep that tax rate low and give the taxpayer or the resident the benefit of that savings just in the following year and the year after by allowing us to use that on capital that we need as a county. And that's been our mode in the last few years, at least since I've been here, because it's allowed us then, based on your direction as a board, to keep that tax rate as low as possible.
So Jeff, what do you forecast for this year to finish for fund balance from the current fiscal year?
For the general fund, I have not looked at the expenditure side at this point because of the same issue we have with contracts and letting of contracts and those different things. On the revenue side, we're probably a couple $3 million up if I had to guess at this point. What we have seen is in these grants, this IGR stands for intergovernmental revenue. In these areas, some of those haven't materialized as expected. So once you take it all together, I would expect us in that $3 to $4 million range, maybe. We try not to forecast that because, again, we want to know once our audit's complete and once all of our reserves and all of our liabilities are taken into account, then what we have for the following year. So we really don't start looking at that until probably late August, October, once the year's closed. Because keep in mind, we have a 45-day run-out period. So all of the invoices and everything that are coming in, plus the roll and encumbrances where we've made contracts in this year and it didn't come in, we have ongoing commitments and those kinds of things. So it's really hard at this point. And our policy has been, and I think the board's policy has been, that once then the audit is complete in the following fiscal year is when we take advantage of that fund balance versus trying to do something with it in the current. Because I can tell you today, I could be wrong because I don't know what contract we're going to let. And then you could end up in a situation where you've appropriated it, but it's not there. And then that has other ramifications in that process.
So what's our? I'm sorry.
I would note that one of your pretty large contributors of not expending their entire budget in prior years has been the sheriff. I do not predict that that's going to occur this year. Based upon some of the spending that we've seen over the last couple of months, that the amount of money that they have turned back into us in prior years, I don't think we will see that this year.
So what is our fund balance now?
You have a 20% policy, so 20% of this plus your school fund plus the other budgetary funds. I want to say it's right around $60 million of fund balance, and that's one of the contributing factors, your AAA bond rating. And above that, you have about $7 million above that 20% threshold that can be allocated or appropriated for other uses.
And you told me the other day it was about 26.5%.
Right, it's in that neighborhood, give or take.
So 1% equates to $2 million, $1.5 million?
Yeah, that's in that. I have to go back and look exactly.
So
Because again, we do that calculation once a year when the audit's complete, and it's based on a number of factors.
So you're forecasting, based, I mean, it's conservative, but you could be up $4 million this year, which above and beyond that $7 million?
Usually you can count on about 3%. Now, the discussions we've had, particularly because your two biggest contributors to that, which we'll talk about tax rate allocation in just a moment, but your two biggest contributors to that can be Human Services and the Sheriff's Department because they're the lion's share of your tax and your expenditures. But in talking with the Sheriff's Office in the last few days, they don't believe they're going to be a large contributor back to fund balance this year. In fact, probably I would venture to guess the only thing they're going to contribute back in any large scale would be vacancy money, and they are running pretty staffed up. So, because that money, the way you achieve fund balance is dribs and drabs. There's several hundred accounts where we get revenue, but there's also personnel vacancy savings where we budget a position, somebody leaves, after we pay out any leave or anything, then that position may stay open for 3 months. Well, you want to be sure you budget it for full employment so that you can ensure that if you have somebody to go into that position, you can do that. So usually you can count on about 2 to 3% on either side of that equation. It just depends on the year. We've seen years where expenditures were 4%, but revenue we were actually 1% under. We've seen it flipped. Well, we'll never be overexpended, but we've seen it flipped where it's 1% savings on the expenditure side, which is really, really close, against maybe 3 or 4% growth on the revenue side, which we didn't anticipate. So there's, it's across thousands and thousands and thousands of lines of expenditures that 1 and 2% add up, and $3 million, $5 million seems like a lot, but when you take that as a percentage basis across the spectrum, within 2 to 3 to 4% of that neighborhood is fairly close given all the factors that we deal with as a government. And then things like fuel, where we're trying to project fuel price, fuel usage, all those factors go into that. Does that?
When is the last time the county's fund balance at the end of the year was below $3 million? Or I should say that our sources were above our expenditures by $3 million or greater.
If you went back, I don't have it on this
like
table, but if you went back a few years, we've had in the last 4 or 5 years where we've been revenues didn't come in and expenditures were closer to fully expended. So we've had several years off and on where that was the case, where actual expenditures outpaced actual revenue. So it's not inconceivable that could happen. Again, that's with the appropriation of that fund balance then as part of your capital program. Otherwise, if you didn't carry that money every year, and scale up and down your capital program based on available resources, you wouldn't have a tool, or you'd have to go out and borrow. And once you lock in that debt service, that's no longer negotiable. So you can't scale debt service. You have to pay it as it's coming in. So that's kind of the challenge, and the way we address that and keep that tax rate low is by every year scaling our capital program to fit within our available resources. This year's capital program is scaled to leave about $2 million in the appropriable fund balance, because there are some projects that we are not sure what the costs are going to be yet, particularly the 911 call renovations necessary to kind of help them downstairs, and then the 4-H pavilion project out the accident pavilion. When those are known, we will come back to you and make a recommendation then on how to fund those without going out and borrowing to the market. So it's, and I know the kind of the thinking is, well, if we've achieved that savings the prior year, why can't we achieve that savings as part of the budget? But what I'm telling you is you want to plan to fully expend and then use that savings in the following year to kind of help you with your capital program. Or if you didn't achieve it, that means you needed it all. And there's a lot, that allows you that flexibility going forward.
With our bond ratings, what is the difference in a, because when I was on the board prior years, we had 8%, and then I know it went to the board as a policy of 20%. What does that do for us as far as the bond ratings go?
You now have the highest bond rating possible in general fund as well as your utilities, and that is in large part due to
20%?
The budget policies of this board, the reserve policies of this board, that when we met with the rating agencies a year and a half ago in October when we were going out on the market for water and sewer, I mean, what they indicated was that the fiscal policies that we had undertaken were a direct driver as to seeing a very financially stable county, and that's why we received the increases.
So is there a number, like it's 20,
We're-
it's 20, 19, 18, 21?
They look at the whole picture.
Right.
They look at, do you use your fund balance to pay
Ability
for
tax.
ongoing costs? They look at how do you handle your utility? For example, the policy is that there's a 12-month reserve in your utility. The way we manage our debt, for example, in the utility side of it right now, we expend the money and then we go borrow it, so we're paying for exactly which is how we're proposing these upcoming bonds, versus doing it off of estimates, borrowing the money, and then having not enough or too much. It's based upon our overall reserve policies. So they see Union County as a very stable, fiscally conservative unit of government with appropriate. So I can't say that they looked at a specific number, but what they do is they look at the policies that we have in place, how we have applied those policies, and the determination was based upon that.
So if we had an emergency, something came up that we didn't expect, and we went to 19 instead of 20. Right now we're at 26, right?
Yes, but some of that is
Give or take,
paying
but
for,
it's planned to change, yeah.
when we, as part of this budget,
Part of this
we've
budget
taken a
projects.
budget, right?
Right. But like if we had something come up like we had to change out all the radios, or just, and they said do it now, and these radios they don't work anymore, and we could do it, right? Or
What you would do
Endanger
in that
bond.
case is, in an effort to ensure that you maintained your policy and maintained your ratings and all those other factors, what the expectation would be then is we would put into place a plan to return back to that policy rule. And that's kind of what you have. And your policy is that you'll use fund balance then for one-time items, and that's why it's been well received at the rating agency side. And it does provide you that cushion. And keeping in mind that 20% is less than 3 months of operating. And in this county, you get the majority of your revenue. You don't get paid on a monthly basis. You get the majority of your revenue in a very tight window. So over the year, that 20% is part of our cash management strategy, and that even to that point of that 25, 26%, as part of our cash management strategy that allows us to go through that year and be able to do the bond project Cindy mentioned, without having to go to the market, having to borrow money, borrow in advance, and having accrued interest and those kinds of things. So it's the structure of fund balance, how we use it and how we use it in relationship to tax rate is really a cash flow planning tool, and really it works as a total plan, a full financial plan, not just isolation of single pieces becomes a real challenge. And that's, you know, that's why it's worked so well. That's why the market's recognized by rating upgrade, changing our outlook. That's why I've been able to maintain services even when revenues didn't come in as anticipated. There was no loss of service in that process. Whereas before, in the late 2000s, what you saw was layoff. You know, when debt service spiked, because you had some variable rate instruments, when debt service spiked, it led you into a position where you had to lay people off. And part of that was because the reserve levels were not high enough at that point to kind of absorb that shock to the system, if you will. So that's kind of what we have in front of you right now. That's when we talk about sustainability. And we show you this because this proves out to us as we look at our modeling, look at our growth factors, and consider all these components together as our financial plan, as a long-term financing plan. We're telling you that what we put in front of you is a sustainable funding structure in light of your strategic objectives. So, and considering that and how we are able then to fund our capital plan is through that process as part of a component or a piece of that overall picture.
Do you remember what the 2016 projected total sources of revenue was? That's the actual. Do you remember the projected?
I want to say probably in the 165 range.
So we projected more than we got.
Oh, I'm sorry, no, projected, I had that. It's probably in the 155 range, 156. I think it was 156 if I remember right.
So about 4 million, you said about 4 million in additional revenues. 2 million went to the school side, or?
No, this doesn't include the school side. This is just our fund.
So the 2 million additional they got in true up, that was in addition to what we had, right?
Right. So, and keep it in mind too, and part of this process is you have the ad valorem change in the North Carolina motor vehicle tax. So we're still seeing some increase in hangover from that process. Remember, we talked about 7% growth in motor vehicles. That's not a sustainable growth rate. So folks went through that pent-up demand during the recession. They went out and purchased a bunch of new cars, so you had a lot of new value in that process. I would anticipate that value will start to level out, and you won't see that increased growth. In fact, this is modeled at like 5% on the motor vehicle side versus 7 or 8%. So again, it's the impact of a lot of little pieces that create the larger impact. And 2 to 3% on a budget this size, while it seems like a lot of money at $3-4 million, is not a large swing when you're talking about estimated against actual. So it helps us, again, go back and scale the capital program in that process.
When you transfer, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
when you transfer the fund balance for the uses, assuming everything goes through on the budget, what will be left above the 20% dollar-wise?
If everything came in as estimated, what you'd be looking at is about $2 million under the 18. If you're doing it for 17, you're probably looking at about $3 million, if I remember right.
But as Jeff has indicated, there are 2 projects that we do not have a cost for yet, and that is the 4-H pavilion, because the study is ongoing right now, as well as the 911 center renovations. And so that was kind of held in abeyance to be able to handle those 2 projects with not having to go out and do any kind of short-term debt or anything like that.
My question is, approving this budget, does it approve those projects, or are they standalone projects? Because, you know, we talked about the Board of Elections. We've got shortage of Sheriff's Department funding and the 911. Aren't those standalone projects? Shouldn't be a part of the budget.
Well,
How you going to fund them? Yeah, you've got to consider it,
Right.
but
we're keeping.
approving the budget does not approve any project.
That's right. Well, it does for the projects that are in the recommended budget. What Cindy's saying is we kept it on kind of our list. I keep a running list of things that we talk about and that we're working through, things we have studies out for, and those kind of things. So we provide kind of a funding plan before we put those studies out, because we believe we shouldn't put studies out that you can't fund. So when we're looking at, for instance, looking at the space needs and at the when you're doing the 4-H pavilion analysis, we have in mind what we think it may be. So we've got enough. We kind of reserved off on our working documents enough to cover that. If you were to build, for instance, a new sheriff's facility and the space needs study, if that yields a new office building, you don't have enough money in any of these options to build that facility. So what we're looking at is twofold. It's being sure we kind of on our working plan have the funding for that because it's a small enough project to do that way, but also what are small enough to do as means. So if you were talking, for instance, a 911 communications center and you were going to build that out of the ground, that's very expensive space, between $300 and $400 a square foot. So you're probably talking in the $10 to $15 million range at a minimum. You don't have enough fund balance to do that in any given year, so that's probably going to be a debt project. Same thing with the sheriff's office space. It's going to probably be at least a $10 to $20 million project. So you don't really have enough funding through your fund balance to do that. But our anticipated cost in the 4-H pavilion probably is around that $2.5 to $3.5 million. We probably have enough money in fund balance to do that. The renovations at the 911 communications center, probably on the order of $400,000 to $500,000. We have enough money in fund balance to be able to do that. So it becomes kind of on your scratch pad, your initial estimate against what your working plan is for that fund balance. And then it's a judgment perspective, because I think that some of those projects that you and I talked about are of the magnitude that they're probably GO election projects or a certificate of participation, which is a non-GO debt instrument. But you're not going to probably pay cash for a large facility like that in that case.
I'm sorry, I don't remember this board voting on doing the Ag Center pavilion.
The 4-H pavilion was one of the capital projects that have been listed for a number of years that this board has discussed. We've selected a consultant. We have not selected, we're out of an RFP right now. As it relates to, did I get that right? Or we're negotiating a contract right now. Okay. But the actual contract will come back to the board for authorization. But it's just that, as any other project that we have, is that we identified it in the capital improvement plan, and it is part of the budget document, but the actual expenditure of funds does come back to the board. It's over $100,000.
And there's been money put in for that study. So
Yes.
the board approved the study to determine what the need was and what that should look like, and kind of what that process. So we kind of worked through that planning process. And again, I go back, it's like, because we use that as a tool and it's scalable up and down based on the available resources. That's why I think that some of those other facilities that you're referring to, even the Board of Elections, if you're to build a new Board of Elections facility, that's probably not a small enough project that you're going to be able to fit it into your fund balance parameter. It's a big enough project where you'll probably have to go to the market and use some kind of debt instrument or a tool to do with to do that. So
I'll be honest, my concern is we're talking about building a recreational facility because we got sufficient fund balance, but we got to raise taxes. You know, we're flush with cash, but we're going to raise taxes. It just doesn't go together.
I wouldn't say you're flush with cash. You have the way you fund your capital again. Instead of having a tax rate to fund capital annually, as you use that savings to, going back, the 4-H pavilion is something that's been under planning for a while and in study for a while. So you absolutely, as a board, will have to appropriate the money for that ultimately, and that's up to you guys. But before we put out that study, we wanted to be sure that we had sufficient funding to do that project. Again, that's not enough money to do some of those other projects. So you don't have, there's not a tool right now to build a communication center, to build a sheriff's office addition or a new jail. You're talking, those are large projects. The projects we're talking about are smaller projects that you can fit into this type of funding structure. And you wouldn't be able to reduce your tax rate based on that one-time funding, because then you'd be back into next year. You'd have to raise the tax rate back to cover your ongoing
Well,
funding.
we've got to figure out a funded methodology for fire completely next year. There's no doubt about it. We've got a broken process.
So Jeff, you have the revised budget for uses at 166.
Right.
Is that where you think we're going to come in, or are we going to come in at that 162? Or you said 4 million, if we look at the sources, are we going to come in at 157?
I couldn't tell you. I haven't sat down to try to look at that because it's been the board's, it's been our process, and based on kind of what your fund balance policy is and everything, to wait for the audit process. Because I can tell you one of the larger driving factors in the revised process, the revenues typically don't change unless we're adding grant revenue. What has changed in this process through the expenditures is that carry forward and roll forward contracts. and those obligations. And that's the part I really struggle being able to tell you right now, because while we're standing here in May, we still haven't closed April, and I still have May and June and all the contracts that are being let right now at the end of the year and receiving and all those different pieces. So this number, that roll number has been as high as $2 to $3 million. It's been as low as $1 million. It just depends kind of on what's going on in those factors. That's why when you close your books, then you know exactly how much you have, and then we bleed that into the next year versus trying to guess at this point and spend money that we're not sure of.
Well, and this is my concern. When I look at the sources, you're projecting that we're going to have sources above $4 million excess at the end of this year, give or take. Take away the extra $2 million for the pavilion, leave that alone. You still have $4 million there, and if we come in at the 157, have that $4 million, that provides additional cushion. And then if you forecast again going forward into this next year, that's additional cushion. So there's a lot of cushion being built in there, it seems like, above and beyond what we're projecting for uses.
It's okay, so I think, let me help clarify that a little bit. That $4.2 million is budgeted use. So if everything came in as planned, what you would have is about $2 to $3 million left above your 20% policy. Okay? Based then on that, I'm sorry, it'd be right around that $5 million. So based on that, then we carried it forward. So what we'd anticipate at the end, when all else being equal at 18, is you would have about $2 million left. So we've tried to go in and manipulate that and be able to spend it all down. We're not looking at having $10 or $12 million at the fund balance, in the fund balance at that point.
But we will have, after we spend the $7 million that's proposed, we'll have $3 million left?
Probably should be in that neighborhood, but at the end of 18, when it's all said and done.
And we
All else
have in
being
there,
equal, of course.
and we have in there right now 26 million, 27 million?
You have 27%.
So what's the balance, what's the total amount above 20% right now,
As of today,
as of today?
you're probably looking at right around 5 or 6 million.
Plus the 3 million for next year.
Plus the 3 million that would come out, you would expect from this year. So yeah, you're going to.
Well, you throw out 4 million for this year. So if I count the 2 years, you've got 7 in there now, plus 4 this year potentially, plus 3 next year.
All else
That's
being
14
equal.
million.
But you already have commitments on this 4.2. So you have the commitments on the 4.2. So that's off. That's out of the equation because it's appropriated.
Okay.
You have 5.5 then that we're proposing. So all else being equal, if all of these came in exactly as planned, what you'd be left with is right around $2 to $3 million.
So what is our revenue per penny? Because I'm coming up with a couple different numbers.
It is 2.46.
When I look at the fire tax rate, it's 2.544.
You can't, this number, ad valorem taxes, it's not a perfect one-to-one because in there, that's, the tax rate's based on current ad valorem tax. Included in the ad valorem tax revenue line is prior year garnishments, interest earnings on late fees, a whole bunch of different non-rate components that roll up because they're still ad valorem taxes, but they're ad valorem taxes from not current tax rate.
But they're included in the proposed budgets? Right.
Yes.
So the rate should be the same, would it not? They're included?
Not necessarily. It depends on how old the fund is. Okay, so like the fire fund, for instance, has like a 2-year track record. So everything collected from prior years, you wouldn't get, the fund won't get the benefit of everything except for the last 2 years. So some of those some of the total tax rate historical collections will go back to the general fund. Only the 2 years of history from prior year collections go to the fire fund. So it's not a perfect, you can't back into the calculation. If you were to look at just the ad valorem number, you won't be able to back into the penny value calculation.
They just get another year of other, right, for the fire fund? So they won't match up.
Right, they won't match up because we have more prior years, we have more collection, we have different penalties, and we kind of base that based on, I'm working with John's office, kind of based on how each of those funds performs because it's a different group of people in each of those funds too. So if you're looking at, for instance, Henry Bridge Fire District, that's a different population than in all of Union County. So there's a lot of little factors that go in to determine how much we should be budgeting for collections and those pieces.
And right now, we're at 99.6% collection. It's doubtful we'll get much better than that. So really, growth in subsequent years is going to be new construction, renovations, those type of revenues that we see as it relates to the overall assessment process of structures. Versus us, because we have gotten to the point that I think we probably doing as well as we possibly can do.
Squeeze it anymore.
Yeah.
Well, can we recognize John again?
You certainly can, yes, we need a step.
I'm glad you mentioned the collection rate piece, because under general statute, all of our other revenues, we can do an estimate based on your statistical analysis and how we're going to be. For instance, when we look at sales tax, we kind of look at market conditions and so forth. What the general statutes require of us is that we use our last actual collection rate as a max to be able to establish the estimated revenue in the upcoming year. So as Cindy mentioned, when we look back and we see, say, 98.5%, we're statutorily capped at estimating 98.5% collection on that property. So while at 100% collection, we may be that $3 million up. So part of that addition of revenue is where we go from a 98.5% collection to a 99% collection, but the general statute won't let us estimate that 0.5% increase. And again, you kind of reach terminal velocity, so we don't really, in discussions with John's office, 98.5 is kind of our cap. We said we don't believe that's sustainable to go to continuing above that level. So that's part of what plays into that additional revenue, is where we go back, collect back taxes, or we've had years where if you were looking at our financial statements, we collected over 100%, which conceptually doesn't make a lot of sense until you factor in that we've collected back taxes in that process. But we can't estimate 101% of ad valorem tax to be able to put in the revenue. So that's part of that process and why we go over in the ad valorem taxes.
Yes. Help me understand this. In 2017 to 2018, you got the revised budget 2018. That's the budget we're working on, correct?
That's the one proposing. Yep.
Okay. So you've got $8 million in increased revenues, and that comes from the tax increase of almost 4 pennies.
There's no tax increase built into this. Tax increase built into this.
So that's just revenue growth.
It's your ad valorem, primarily your ad valorem and your local option sales tax is where the two growths are.
Which we had 12.35 million this year, and we're predicting 8 million. And I understand being conservative about this better.
Well, it's not just that. When the legislation occurred as it related to the redistribution of sales tax, we had a guesstimate as to how much money we would actually receive. So a lot of the true-up is based upon what we actually did receive.
Right. So then if we throw another almost 4 pennies on that, right? What's the proposed increase total?
The 3.9 cents,
Plus-
3.09 cents plus
plus
the
the
0.56. So it's 364.
Okay, so 364 thrown on top of that. That number is going to
369.
be, yeah, right?
This is not including any of those. Those are in separate funds and separate funding mechanisms for fire and then for the debt. Being
So
separate.
fire's not in that at all.
This is not included. The only fire funding in here is the one-time 995.
So we're throwing another 6-7 million on top of that, right? So we got 8 million almost and another 7 million on top of that.
I wouldn't necessarily look at it that way because you dedicated those taxes to those purposes. So for instance, all the money we collect on your tax bill, you see a line that says countywide fire tax.
Right.
All the money collected for fire tax stays with fire
Right,
departments.
no, I'm not talking about fire tax, I'm just 3.09 cents. That's each
And
one.
that would be dedicated, you would see a line on your bill. And John's going to shoot me if I keep adding lines to the bill, but if you'll see a line on the bill that says voted general obligation debt for 3.09, and if you look at this table, and I'm going to jump ahead, I'll come back to finish that thought here in just a moment. But what you see here is, in working with your debt number, the 309 allows us to take the peak year of that debt service of 10.2 million and be able to fund that at 309. Your 309 is going to only generate about $7.5 million of revenue, but your peak debt service year is really 10.3. So if you were trying to negate this 3.09, you're going to have to do one of two things. You're going to have to cut services based on the recommended budget to then bank $7.5 million, or you can take the level loaded tax rate as per the referendum and then put that in, and you can see then we build, just like we have been in public works, in our utility, we build a little bit of balance and then start spending that balance down until finally get down to here. So after you get through that first 309, that's the peak tax rate. You can start to trail off and reduce that tax rate over time. If you were not taking that, or you were forced to absorb it, what you really ended up absorbing is this peak year, and you can't help but to have an impact with that. And I go back to the ballot language. This is the ballot language. It said providing that additional taxes may be levied in an amount sufficient to pay the principal and interest on the bonds be approved. That's the statutorily required debt service, or I'm sorry, the statutory language on the ballot. And I think one of the big things that we've had a lot of conversation as we've gone through this process is that you as a board really focused in during that process that any of those campaigns, any of those bond campaigns that were going on, stated to the voters that there will be a tax increase. And I think that that's important to note, that this is what the voters, and all the literature and everything else we put out, this is what the voters voted for in that process. And you have a policy in place right now, which is part of the reason the LGC, we work with the LGC, and part of the reason your AAA, that says it's anticipated that new general obligation debt will be funded through increased tax rate. And the voter approval of general obligation debt represents a tacit approval of the accompanying tax rate. I think you run the real danger of putting yourself back in a position where the board had to raise the tax rate 10 cents to be able to fund capital, but also in the position where the county had to lay off 88 positions. And it was through the absorption, trying to let growth, when it didn't materialize, pick up that additional cost. And I think that's the danger you run. You'd be able to do it in this year just because you don't have any debt payments. But when you start doing it in these years, what will happen is you will have to pick it up somewhere. So that's going to come through a cut in services or layoffs. And based on what you told us is a fiscally sustainable model and trying to fiscally sustain the county and the services we provide, we would recommend that this would be based on the voter approval and based on that policy, that this would be where you would increase that rate. Otherwise, you miss that opportunity, because once you absorb that, I don't think you're going to be able to go back then and increase that rate, except for operations. But right now, you have a voter-approved referendum that said that gives approval to the additional taxes to cover that principal and interest.
But that doesn't mean spend everything we have and we get extra.
No,
And that's the way I'm looking at it. If I understand slide 4, just make sure, is that showing up that growth for the current year or in 18 proposed?
Slide 4. That's the very front slide. That is the estimated growth in 18.
In 18.
Right, so that's going from here to here. Well, actually, that's countywide. That's not.
He's talking about slide 4 on budget drive, all the way back.
This number is across all funds.
Okay.
So these numbers, that $6.5 million, includes the school fund, the EMS fund, the fire fund, and the tax districts all together, because that's the county collects ad valorem universally. So that $6.5 million increase is across all funds. Where you would see it as it would relate to the general fund tax would be about that is what, a little under $2 million
plus
increase.
Plus the $4 million.
Which would be the other part of that equation, sure.
See, the way I look at it is that we've grown because of the policies that we've done, and we should be proud of those. We should be proud of the economic growth that we've had. We should be proud of the growth that we've had and people even moving here, because the schools have not changed. We've not increased the population of schools, yet we've increased the population of the county, and we've grown by 3.83%. Our sales tax revenue is going up. Our automobile, a lot of people that are moving here are wealthy and can afford high-end cars.
A lot of the growth in your tax, though, for your automobiles is, we were probably only collecting between 82, 84% when they were separate.
We've been doing
now
that
that
for
they
about
are
3 years now.
now that they are together, that definitely has an increase.
That's right.
But
the way they collect them now is
Yes,
better, because they collect
yes.
it through the
Yeah,
through
we
the
are
mail.
now getting a lot more revenue
That's
because
right.
of the way they're collected.
But when we look at the things that we do, like economic development, when we support that, and I do, I don't think there's anything left that I haven't supported economic development wise. At what point do we start returning that back to the taxpayers and saying, look, we're doing a lot better, we're doing very good, and you as the taxpayer deserves to benefit from that. And that's where, when I look at 1.4 million for radios, that we've got brand new radios about to be put in, they're going to be old. When I look at some positions that we have, you know better how to cut them than I do.
But I have provided you with my recommended
I
budget,
understand.
and it is now at this point in the time that the board can direct what they choose not to do.
Well, to that question, Commissioner, this is why we put this table in here, because I think this is a very appropriate table then for this discussion, is if you look over here, this is the service areas, this is the allocation of general property tax. So this is where your tax dollar goes. What it funds. The 27.82 cents, how it's divvied out. You can see central revenue, that's all the stuff that doesn't have a specific department home, so that's largely your sales tax and your current ad valorem taxes and so forth. So if you were to look through that, you really have two main areas that take up the vast majority of your ad valorem taxes. You have your sheriff's office, which is almost 12 cents of your total tax rate, and you have human services, which takes up about 8.6 cents. So between those two, they make up 20 cents of your 27 cents. So logic would follow then that if you were to make cuts, there's not enough funding in these other areas then to try to make those reductions. And I think the challenge then would become, because you've told us that your social services programming and your human services programming and your public safety is a high priority, is where
Most
then...
of them are mandated in human services.
Right, and most of those services are mandated. Where then would you take that funding from? Because in having gone through this budget in detail, I think that the recommended services and the recommendation is sustainable and provides those services that the residents have asked for and that you have directed to us that you want to have. I think that's where the manager is at. When she talked, the recommended budget that we're providing to you is that package of what we would recommend. So I think in looking at this then, if you were trying to achieve, let's try to get the $7 million for the debt service, you could take all of the administrative services, all the county commissioner's budget, and all the board elections, and you still wouldn't achieve that savings. So it's really on an order of magnitude then of how you would go about doing that. And what services then you would like to not provide going forward. So in the interest of time, we've already covered that. Let's see, okay. So again then, kind of the last piece is our organizational strengthening, and this is part of where your money is going. Part of that increase that you're talking about, a pretty good chunk of it is going to support our employees. And you as a board have prioritized our employees in the past. So we're recommending that we continue our customer service and visioning training, which is an effort then to provide a customer service experience and training throughout our organization. Most large organizations have a philosophy of how we want our customer interactions to go in the visioning. We're going to continue that, continue our tuition and training program. One of the things that happened during the recession is we cut back on our funding. You as a board has since added tuition reimbursement and doing some other programming that's helping develop our employees. In fact, I think Cindy sent out today an email with all of the with our tuition reimbursement recipients and how that they've used that to help improve services. Our strategic workforce development, one of the things you prioritized was succession planning in that process several years ago. This is part of our succession planning process, identifying where in the workforce we have high performers and where we need to augment those skill sets, where our risk is. I can tell you a fairly significant portion of our population is within 5 years of retirement.
25% of your directors can retire within the next 5 years.
And that's a significant brain drain on the organization, an experiential drain. And so coming to a strategic plan on how we develop our employees and how we go and build on that is significant. Those are built within kind of our expenditure lines, so those don't have an additional cost, direct cost in the next year. But there are two very important pieces that you as a board have kind of supported in the past. The first one I'll talk about real quick is the compensation classification study. You approved last year funding for a comp and class study. One of the things that happened during the recession is the organization wasn't able to move its pay ranges or wasn't able to provide pay increases, and that's put us at a market disadvantage in recruiting and retention. So this comp and class study is an objective tool to establish what our pay philosophy is and where our market position should be and what the market position on each of our positions should be. We put in enough money for a half-year implementation. We don't know what the cost of that will be, so this is a starting point, but we know that there will be recommended changes. I think Cindy said in the past she would expect a 30-30-30
That's what I've seen.
breakdown in other organizations. I think that's probably real close to right, and talking with the consultants, they've seen it anywhere, in an organization our size, can be anywhere from $3 to $5 to $6 million, depending upon how you do that and what your philosophy is. We're just in the early stages of that process.
Have we chosen a consultant?
We have chosen a consultant.
They're already on board.
Yes.
Green is the name of the firm.
Okay.
So we're going through that process. I can tell you not everyone, there will be positions that will absolutely we'll be recommending increases to, but not everyone will get an increase out of that. It's based on a number of factors. But then you also have your performance pay pool, and this $1.9 million is through all funds. And this is based on the employee performance over the last year. So this isn't a COLA or an automatic adjustment. There will be some folks that won't get this. There'll be really high performers that will receive more than 3%. But this is, the board in the last couple of years, particularly last year in approving the money for the study in 2017, and then every year, I know since I've been here, the board supported a 3% salary pay pool to be able to do performance pay increases. And this is part of this structure, and that's why you see the jump going from here to here is because of that general fund impact of that portion, as well as some of the positions. But the bulk of it is in these two pieces. We've also trying to address our other post-employment benefit liability. We're continuing to see that grow as our population ages, and you have that requirement, the statutory requirement, as well as your obligation to other employees with law enforcement and the statutory, and then your other employees who are out of the or went through the system years ago, you have an obligation to pay them. So this $1.2 million additional to address that ongoing liability to continue to shore up the financial position of the county. Otherwise, we talked about that a little bit during the projections, that liability will continue to grow, and eventually that bill will come due. And then you have a health insurance increase of about $1.7 million across the organization. And at this point, we haven't pushed that back to the employees. We're recommending the county continue to absorb that as we continue to work on our health plan.
So all of this is showing up under compensation and benefits?
It's part of that increase in...
So the benefits, you see the health insurance from here to here plus the OPEB, that's in this line, and the compensation classification study plus the pay pool would be in this line right here.
So if I back out the $1 million, that's a $2.8 million difference, which is 6.4%.
What you back out from here to here would be the about 1.3 million, 1.2 million for the performance pay pool. And then you would back out $1 million on top of that. So about 2.2, 2.3 million in the general fund from here to here is related to those two pieces. And then the addition between here and here is related to the additional positions in the general fund. Again, keeping in mind, some of those are offset by intergovernmental revenues and different things like that. So it's not a perfect one for one each position. For instance, like in social services, those positions are funded at different rates. There's also contract conversion. So you see some costs moving from, you see these actually in operating costs, a little bit of a reduction. That's because some of that cost is moved from this line to that line because of a conversion from contract to employee, which allows them in the NC FAST system, particularly in the case of social services, allows them to work in the NC FAST system because the federal government has said unless you're an employee, you can't work in that system. They're no longer going to allow contract employees to do that.
A question about social services, why you said that. We hired 5 positions at the first of the year last year, and then we hired 5 additional positions.
We hired 10, and you put 10 in reserve, and we did not hire those. They were economic services, which handles food stamps, etc. Based upon the performance of that unit, they have been able to meet the criteria So we did not come back and ask for the second 10 positions. It was 10, right? Yeah.
But was it five?
No, it was 10,
10.
it was 10 plus 10.
So 20
20
total positions.
So you authorized 10, we hired that 10, and we placed them in the Economic Services Division of Social Services. We put 10 aside that we said in December, January, that if in fact we needed them, we would come back to you for you to authorize them. We did not in fact have to do so because we're able to get our numbers to where they're supposed to be. So that money rolled to fund balance. We did not expend that money.
Those positions were 25% paid for by us or the state or the feds?
In economic services, that 25%, we pay 75%, the state pay, no.
They pay 75, we draw at 75 on
Yeah,
this.
we
We
pay
pay
25.
25.
So they would, those positions weren't needed to help with record keeping in any other department, or we could use them for that?
Well, you wouldn't have the same ratio.
Right.
And we specifically asked for them for economic services. That is where we were having the issues in meeting the state mandates. Since we were able to meet the state mandates without those additional 10 positions, we did not request them. Where we have put our focus this year is on child welfare services, which is where we think we need additional resources. And that's a 50-50, that's a 50-50 match.
Right, and the cost that you see is the cost, the net cost was part of the conversion included in that discussion.
So that full amount would be what you showed us on here, the full cost, and then the intergovernmental or governmental
But it's,
transfers.
we
grants.
show you the full cost and then it's offset
By
by,
the
yes,
income.
yes.
And that's done on a, that's part of the reason they were requesting for a financial analyst, because maximizing that revenue match and being sure that we're getting back every penny that we can, that's a full-time job in and of itself. And we don't have that right now. So that's part of that equation that went into that.
Explain to me why you didn't plan on going down a million instead of going up.
And where?
In that extra million you're gonna get with a comp plan. Why didn't you think, I mean,
Because
could
I
you go the
know,
other way too?
well, no, I will tell you from a recruiting perspective, it took us almost a year to recruit engineers. I know in some other areas, we are having appraisers and tax. It took us probably 9 months to get someone to accept our salary level, so that I know we have positions within our organizations that we are not at market because we can't get people to come to work for us. And what we had to do with our engineering positions is we had to reduce our qualifications, reduce the level of position, and we are hiring people directly out of school, and we are training them, because we cannot hire someone with the necessary experience because we can't afford to pay them.
Well, and I
So
don't-
I'm pretty confident that in some of our positions, I'm not saying countywide, but that we are nowhere close to market.
And I don't think, we know that $1 million is only the first probably tranche of that. And I don't think you want to devalue your payroll, because essentially what the message you'd be then communicating is that we think everyone's overpaid. We're going to see a net reduction in payroll because of a market study. And I just don't think anecdotally that that's the case. And I think, in talking with a consultant, based on, and we'll talk about pay philosophy at some point in the process, but I don't think $1 million is going to be enough to
I
move forward.
have a question on that. Like, if you're doing both in the same year, or you're doing both at the same time, the 3% that we're talking about giving as a performance increase, and then if you give, let's say somebody comes back and their position's under, that person's not getting that new classification pay?
They're very separate and distinct, no.
So it would be
You-
like a new person coming in will get it, not the old
No,
person?
no, sir, because then you end up with compression. And when you end up with compression, what you do is you have someone who's been here 5 years making the same amount of money as a brand new employee. That is problematic. So what the proposal is, and I mean, that we are we've just hired the consultants, they're just now doing focus groups, so we don't know what the recommendation is going to be. But the pay for performance is to reward those employees for the prior 12 months of performance. So it is strictly a pay for performance. If someone is a non-performer, we usually, after 2 non-performing years, they're no longer part of this organization, but we usually allow them an opportunity to improve their performance. But if they're a non-performer, if they fall under a 2% rate or 2 rating, we do not provide them with a performance increase. Because they're
I
not.
understand that.
So there's that component. What we have said is that in anticipation that your consultants are going to come in and tell you, you have certain positions that you are going to have to adjust. Not only for new employees coming in, but you're going to have to address the compression issue as well. And I'm not saying on a dollar-for-dollar basis, but there will have to be some recognition that some of these individuals have served this organization for a very long period of time, and it's not fair to bring someone in at the same amount they're making or more than they're making because of the fact that that's what the market now demands.
Then they just leave and come back.
I would hope not, but that is a strategy.
Or the flip side, they become, they demotivated. And because what they see is they see you valuing that external person, and we've heard this, and having talked with employees. What we've heard in some cases is, well, why don't I just leave and come back? Because the person coming into the organization has a better negotiating position. Because once I'm here, then all that, the market piece of that driver of that salary then goes out the door. And part of this competent class study is giving us an objective tool then to continue down that road to be able to keep our pay plan competitive. So really, this is a way to ensure we keep employees, we invest in those employees, we train them. It's a way to keep those resources in the organization so that we're not continually hiring employees and retraining.
And we don't serve as a training grant for somebody else. And we talked about even our whole pay philosophy. We talked about broadbanding. This consultant is doing all of that. They're looking at our job descriptions, the number of classifications we have, what our pay ranges are, going to a broadband pay range. So there are a lot of parts associated with the work the consultant is doing. And their work should be done, we anticipate by, I think, November.
Aiming for that, of course, mid-year implementation of the program. So, okay. Guys, as always happy to ask questions during the process, so that at this point, as Cindy mentioned, what you have in front of you is the manager's recommended budget. And it's at this point that we hand it to you for direction as a board as to what you would have us to do from there. The process will be, we'll put this document out on the website tomorrow for the public to see. One of the things I will point out is this document's a little different. Having met with you all and kind of talked through some of the components of what was in there, it's not near as repetitive as in the past. It's really focused on the programmatic changes. It's a programmatic budget versus an accounting document. So as you look through that, I'm excited for you to see kind of a little different layout and kind of a different thinking on the document. The budget public hearing will be on June 5th. That's the legally required public hearing. Lynn's going to advertise that for us, I believe, on Wednesday, starting Wednesday. And then after that, you have 10 days. Then after the 10 days, you can adopt. We have the adoption tentatively scheduled for the 19th of June. One note from earlier in the evening, there will be a parallel process that you've already seen in your calendar for a public hearing for the Board of Governors, and then the budget adoption as well. For them, we'll have to follow that same calendar. So that's kind of where we're at. At this point, we don't have additional work sessions scheduled, but we leave that then to you as to give direction. So as I was telling Cindy earlier, this is always an exciting time for us, and kind of because this marks the end of our process internally, and now it turns back to you for the public process.
But I have taken notes of all the questions that were asked during the process, so we will put that information together and send it out to all of you.
Absolutely.
Well, I don't think this will come as a surprise to you. I can give you kind of my expectation, but you can guess. I don't think 3 cents is, or 3.5 cents is probably realistic to be able to absorb. When I look at the revenue growth projected, and that's at the 98.5 for certain projections, which we would have to go back to get to that, you're still looking at almost 5% growth in revenue growth year over year. You're looking at every year that I can remember, we've had an excess of funds at the end of the year because you're very conservative, which is a good thing. So my expectation is to be able to find somewhere between a penny and a penny and a half in savings in your proposed budget. I would rather not do that on June 19th as we did prior year. So my hope and
I would prefer you not as well.
and my request, just me, to each of you would be, see what you can do with the budget as a sustainable to come into that penny and a half savings, because we're still growing, the county's still growing, we're still providing growth opportunities for the county, but I don't know, given the amount of growth that we're experiencing, that we need to use up all of that fund growth at this point.
And I don't mean this response to be disrespectful by any stretch, but I have looked at the service that we provide to our customers, and in some cases, we are failing. When we talk about the fire marshal, the fact that we're not meeting some state mandated requirements, that if the board finds it acceptable, that's fine. As it relates to environmental health, if a 4-month waiting period for someone to wait for septic tank or well, for someone to come out to your property is a level of service that you believe is acceptable, then we don't need the additional personnel. But from my perspective, we have tried to look at, as an organization, what should our customers expect and what should we be providing? And that's the budget that I have recommended to you. I don't feel it's appropriate for me. I really do believe in this budget. I would submit it if I didn't. I think it's an appropriate budget for this organization. I don't think it's appropriate for me to negotiate against myself if I believe in this budget. So that's why I really think it has to come down to the board directing me and saying, you know what, 4 months is okay. And if that's okay, then you've identified an area that we don't need to add additional staff. So I think it comes down to looking at those areas and saying, because if I didn't think these components were necessary, I wouldn't have proposed them. Trust me, there's another 50 positions that are out there that I didn't bring forward because I didn't think I could justify them.
But last year we cut a penny out of the rate, which is a little bit less than a penny this year. The only thing that I've heard of is the environmental health. So we have 5 people budgeted. Is 5 people appropriate? I don't know. You know better than I do.
Actually, I think it could be more than that, but I think we were trying to be conservative.
But what does 5 people get us? Does 5 people, and are they spending all of their time, testing 1 or 2 wells, 1 or 2 septic systems? I mean, how much time are they spending? So I don't know if it's 5, if it's 10, if it's 3. There's 51 people in the budget that you proposed. My general feeling is there's room to reduce without negatively impacting services if you're careful, and we're all careful about which ones are chosen not to pursue, just as we did last year. I would rather it be a little bit more of a thought-out process on how we go through it. If another work session is appropriate, then that's fine for me, rather than doing it on June 19th. But if you're pitching it back to me, then I'm good doing it June 19th on that night, the same way we did before. I don't think he gives the organization the right approach. I don't think it does it doesn't treat the organization fairly to do it.
I would agree.
So I would rather do it in maybe another work session to see what's there, along with your recommendations on if we do something, is this sustainable?
If it's the board direction for another work session, we will once we supply you with this information, we'd be happy to conduct another work session. But I've been doing this an awful long time. And I mean, once the manager recommends their budget, and then I'm not trying to be argumentative and I'm not trying to be difficult, but I've recommended a budget I do believe is an appropriate budget for this organization to meet all those objectives that you as a board have identified that you want to achieve in this organization. So for me to go back and say, no, I really didn't mean this one, or no, I really didn't mean that one, I don't think that's genuine, because I wouldn't have put them forth if I didn't think that each one of them was defensible.
I don't think that we're interpreting that you were genuine about it. Last year we took a software product for John that was going to cost $2.5 million. We said we're going to give you half of it, and then you only pay $700,000 for it and a $200,000 thing. So there is errors, opportunity for errors in it. We got $3.5 million in emergency services alone. It's growing astronomically. But yet
And that then amounts to, I think, in that specific case of the software, based on all indications, when you looked across the spectrum, we had software recommendation or proposers that were higher than what we had recommended. So that happened to be kind of an alignment of the timing of that contract, the timing of the bid, plus the timing of the budget that worked out. So you kind of got last year in a position where it aligned for some things that didn't have real service impact. I'll tell you, some of the things you took out last year did have a service impact. You know, again, looking at RFID, one of the things that the library can't move on with in making more efficient changes is until they have the RFID program to be able to do check-in, check-out, and electronic, and allow the librarians to be out and moving around the folks. So that had a service impact. So to kind of pretend that all the reductions you took last year had zero service impact, or that there's errors in the budget somewhere, they're not errors, they're estimates. And again, that's part of the strategy in the following year, to be able to fund your capital and be able to do those projects, to be able to fund the SCBA without having a tax rate increase. So I caution you in thinking in micro pieces of each year and thinking the long-term picture, because this is about long-term fiscal sustainability and being able to set the organization up for building upon itself every year to address those service changes and service needs. So, you know, as you think through those aspects, just kind of take that into consideration, because it's not always about this individual year. It's about the subsequent years as well, and being able to address those needs.
And the concern is that, because last year we cut a lot of one-time cost, which really doesn't impact your tax rate, but we did lower the tax rate by a penny. So when you look at the budget, I think you have to look at ongoing costs, and I think you have to look at one-time costs, and they should really be handled in two separate components, because you're not going to be able to sustain this organization by using one-time money to make up those shortfalls. And that's why 3 years ago, is it 3 years ago, that you all had to raise the tax rate 10 cents. And whether it's this board or a subsequent board that gets faced with that, I think we have to be responsible in the decisions we make.
We're looking at raising 5 cents for some of our citizens, for you and I.
Yeah, in that
It's
tax,
5 cents. I mean,
in that fire tax
no matter what
district.
you call it.
Sure, it's in that fire tax district, but I will tell you that in having talked with Chief Gaddy, for instance, and you're absolutely right, I live in Mineral Springs, that's my tax rate personally. And talking with him and the number of medical calls and the number of runs he's having out of his second station, it absolutely makes sense to add a position. And I would tell you, if I'm out and about driving around and I run my truck into a ditch and I have to have Chief Gaddy come get me out of the ditch and rescue my family, I want somebody at that station to be able to do that. So I have no issue with paying for that penny, knowing it stays in that fire district and knowing it supports that. So I think when you take it and you look at each individual piece, and we have this discussion as well, when you look at 51 positions across the organization, it's a pretty hefty number. But then when you take each individual piece and you look at each individual service impact, it all makes sense from a sustainable service provision perspective. So I would encourage you have a lot of information in front of you to read it, digest it, ask additional questions, because I think once you start going through it, you'll see each individual piece. That's what security software. That's not good. I think what you'll see is each individual piece has a strategic tie and a sustainable service tie. So, you know, from that perspective, then I would encourage you to come back to us with those questions and kind of tell us where you would want to be. Because Cindy's right, on that level, whatever service level you as a board decide is what I think then we will provide. But we've recommended what we believe the service level should be.
Well, one thing that I would say is that I asked these questions a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. A lot of the questions I had tonight.
I think, well, when you talked about the bus depot, I think we provided you
Well,
an
when I'm
answer
talking about
that we received on the bus
talking about
depot.
Viper last week, I sent an email about that. I've been pretty forward in emailing questions
Yes.
about things that I was asking. Because I did want to be able to do something
Which is why we talked about the pay for performance, which is why we talked about, those were questions that you asked, and that's why we provided this information.
So, you know, when I look at this in the radio replacements, $1.4 million. When I look at $850,000 for the radio facility, and I think something can be worked out with that. I really do. So, you know, that would be enough to do the Ag Pavilion almost. You know, a little bit of money on here and there. If we replace these things gradually, rather than trying to do it all at once, just like the breathing packs. If they need $900,000 worth of equipment, then that's fine. Let's give it to them. But if the price is $5,000 more per piece.
That is why we're doing it on a reimbursement basis, because it is general fund money.
But they're, you know, when you're asking to raise taxes, and we see a $12 million increase in revenues across the board, I know that's everything. When we see how many millions of dollars in savings from last year? 4.5?
And it's not across the board saving. What you saw last year was related to debt refunding, was related to a number of factors. So it's a bunch of small pieces, and that's the challenge, and why it's a little bit concerning to go back and try to essentially what's in the industry is called budget for attrition, because it sets you up then to have to pay that bill in the future. So not having that process and using it for capital every year, we do get that savings and we do use it. It's just used in the following year.
What set up the tax increase was a lawsuit, school funding, a recession, a lot of things set that up. But mainly the relationship between the old Board of Education. You can disagree with me.
I would have to respectfully disagree. I think what set you up in that position was that you didn't have, because instead of raising the tax rate as all the school debt was added, the board at the time ate that cost. And you had growth. When you have 10% growth, you can absolutely absorb that. If we had 10% growth, I'd be sitting here telling you, you can absorb the 3 cents, not an issue. But when you're at 3% growth, you can't absorb that increase. And what ended up happening was then through bond savings and those other tools, they relied on one-time money to do ongoing capital maintenance programming. And they got in the trap with the schools. Then you woke up in 2012, 2013 and had no money for capital of the schools. And that's what the centerpiece of the lawsuit was about, was not enough capital money for the schools. And the legislature then told you how much you were going to have. But that was because there was no money available to fund capital in the schools.
And the taxes were raised to fund that. And if the school comes back and if the school board comes back and tells us that we can make that existing capital work, then you don't have to raise the tax for that school bond. So now it's up to us, and like Matt said, if we go $0.015, that gets us close. I mean, we may still have a tax increase. But let's don't say that we're going to increase all these taxes based on the SBCC, the library, and the school bond. Because that's not where the tax increases come from. It's come from growth in government, growth in schools, growth in everything. We're taking the money that we have at our existing tax rate, yeah, but we're also doing a lot of projects. We're buying a lot of stuff.
You're taking one time, but what you're talking about is those are ongoing costs versus one-time money.
Raises are not one-time costs. And that's just something throughout it. This radio system that we pay $700,000 a year, maybe up to that amount. That's not one-time cost, that's an ongoing yearly cost. So those are the things that we do need to look at. And you guys know it better than we do, but if you want to cut, I mean, we can do like we did last year. I just think that when I went to the school chairman and chairman of facilities, and I said, can you do this? The one thing they thanked me for is they said, thank you for giving us the opportunity to do it and you not do it. Because we know best what we can do, and we believe that we can do that.
But one commissioner has gone to 2 members of the 9-member board.
And one commissioner has gone to 6 members, because I'm the school board liaison.
I understand that, Commissioner, but at this point in time, I can only rely upon what the Board of Education has submitted to us as their final budget. If they choose to come back and amend their budget, then we will certainly send out an amended budget, but we have to do so by June 1st. So every indication that I have had is that I'm not aware that they're going to send us an amended budget.
Well,
Which then would mean you all have to make that determination.
To cut at least $0.015 on this county side. Let's see if they do the same on the school side.
And ongoing expenses.
And ongoing expenses. I'll also look at these radio programs and other things. We're running out of time, and maybe we should have done this earlier, I don't know. But we are running out of time.
Some of this I know is one-time funds, but if I look at where we finished in 16, your projection for 17 or for 18, you're looking at a 8% per year growth rate, which is significant for county. Now that does include some other things, but we had talked last year about 1.5% was the growth rate in the county. So if we're growing on average at 8% and the county itself is growing at 1.5, that's a disparity. And so we need to get closer to that the true 1.5.
Well, I think one of the things, and Jeff mentioned it early on, is that in 2009, 2010, we did 2 layoffs in this organization. In 2009, I think they eliminated 100 positions, laid off about 88 people. In 2010, I think it was another 20 positions. We are still recovering from those reductions. And in all departments, we are not at the levels we were at 2005, 2006, 2007. So when you see some of the workloads, one of the areas that we cut significantly was environmental health. That's because we thought that they could absorb it from the standpoint that based upon the recession that we were also in the process of experiencing, that we said, so we went through and we said, all of these areas that we're seeing less new construction, et cetera, so we can reduce those areas. The problem is those areas are now experiencing significant growth, and we provide you statistics within this document, but we have not added staff to address. So for all of those years that we have been growing in population and growing in service provision, this organization has not grown proportionately in keeping up with the service demand. And that's part of the challenge that we have. So I understand what you're saying is, but we're still playing catch up.
And where the growth has been in law enforcement, because the board came on, I believe, in 2010 and prioritized public safety. So as we talked about in the projections document, while if you took an FTE headcount across the universe, we're right now just getting back to where we were in 2010, where you've added those positions when you start looking at it on a departmental basis or a service area basis, is really a lot of all those additional positions have gone into law enforcement, and they've got the bulk. So you still have those depressed service levels or service capability in those individual departments out there. So where all that growth has been is in that public safety side of the house, not in those other general services. And what you're seeing on the demand for services and in the service level perspective is you're not being able to keep up now with that demand on the other side of the house. So we've heavily invested in law enforcement, but neglected to invest in those other areas across the board.
But I don't think anybody's asking you to cut heads. Nobody's saying you need to reduce staff. My comment is only slow the rate of government growth to a more sustainable level.
Jim,
Yes, sir.
just a couple of points from hearing some of the discussion today. One relates to fire funding. Commissioner Helm said something had to be done. The system was broken. I believe the system was broken seven or 8 years ago when we first started talking about it, and we didn't want to take action and do something about it. We had a stakeholders committee that spent 6 or 8 months talking about it, and none of the recommendations were followed for various reasons. Some of them special interest, others that we had people that wanted to look at our fire departments as and fire districts as individual entities, whereas others wanted to look at fire protection on a holistic approach from a county standpoint. So here we are again. We find ourselves having to increase taxes to provide fire protection. I don't think that we have taken advantage of some of the expertise in our fire departments relative to the cost and cost of apparatus, cost of services, cost of needs. One of the things that I asked Lynn, our clerk, to do is to re-advertise for our fire commission, and for that group to sit down and take a look as we move toward facilities and we move toward this issue again of fire funding, to try and involve those folks more that have that expertise that can maybe help us in some of these funding areas. So that's one thing. The other thing has to do with the bond costs. I certainly don't want to raise taxes, and I'll never ever live down. In fact, I'll go down in my legacy, and I'll go down in infamy as the one that did that 10+% tax increase, because I felt like the gun was to my head. And I still believe that, as Jeff said, it had a lot to do with the fact that the commissioners, previous commissioners, didn't have the desire, didn't have the principle, whatever it might be, to raise those taxes when it was necessary. Makes no difference to me where the money comes from. The only point I'd make on that is we have a policy, and I think we should be consistent with that policy. So if we're gonna cut that 3+% that the voters approved, but then we need to repeal our policy. We're gonna find that money somewhere else. We need to eliminate that policy saying that when we borrow money, we're gonna pass the cost on to the taxpayer. Because it will in future years. We're gonna have to pay it for 20 years, or however long it is. It's not gonna go away, but just so we can cut it out this year. And the other one has to do with sharing cost cuts. We saw that happen again in cutting the county side in an effort to fund the growing public school side. I asked Jeff Yates, and this has been a while back, so if I was wrong, if we miscommunicated about what I asked you, what you told me, I don't want to put you on the spot. But when we were talking about the bond issue, I believe I asked you, would it be possible to fund their needs over time through the capital level that we had established currently, $17–18 million a year? I believe the answer was yes. It's my opinion that we could have funded a lot of these projects and moved into the future and funded these projects with a pay-as-you-go capital. So it seems to me with 55, 60 million, whatever the public school bond is, we ought to be able to find a little bit of savings in that capital line as opposed to going, what is it, $1.5 million more this year than last year? And they have less students. So that would be the place I would look. And I'm glad to hear the school board is interested in, they haven't spent the money, so they're interested in giving some of that capital line back in order to prevent a tax increase. I think that's great. But when we talk about sharing the pain and sharing the gain, it's not apples and oranges. Or it is apples and oranges. There's a difference in the size of the school budget and the size of the county budget and the size of services. And Jeff, with your slide that you showed with the percentage of the tax rate that goes to each department, it's hard to cut a significant amount from that county side, in my opinion.
Mr. Chairman? Yes, sir. And let me tell you, there's nobody's opinion, with all due respect to all of y'all, I respect Jerry's opinion and I understand where Jerry's coming from. Because these are things we talked about many, many years ago. When the bonds were, 100 million, 200 million, whatever they were, we had big, huge bonds. And then the economy went south. And it just devastated the workforce here. It's hard on everybody. But we're growing again. We're having money come in. And the schools, by using that existing capital that was, and I've always given the three of you credit, not any blame for that tax increase, because you did what was right. You did what you had to do. You're right. The gun was at your head. You did what you had to do. But we got a new school board, and we worked to get a relationship with them over the past 3 years that has worked out. And we have a brave chairman on that school board and a brave facilities person and good members of that school board who say, yes, we can work with you because you work with us and you helped us. And we need to take advantage of that for the taxpayers and not just, use that money. It's still the same money. It's just being used in a different way. So with them doing that, I feel like we can do some of the same. Not just existing ongoing money, but there's some projects on here that are one time that we can look at as well to say, is this the right thing to do? Or should we study this more? Should we put it off till next year to use that fund balance next year? We should use that growth, that economic development money. SBCC is a great partner in economic development that we have in Union County. And we give economic incentive grants with returns of 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 10 to 1, over a lifetime, I think, a lot more than that sometimes. So do we use that to help SBCC and also tax increase for the taxpayers? Use our growth and use our savings. Our sheriff is giving back money. And I know it may not happen next year.
I know this year.
I asked y'all how much money has he given back per year for the last 3 years?
It's about $1 million, but I can tell you based upon per year. But I can tell
It's
you,
been
based
declining.
upon their, pardon me?
It's been declining.
Well,
It's
been
it was $1 million in the
declining,
first
yes.
year,
But
it's
this
800
year,
last year.
I will tell you that if we get any money back, I will be surprised.
Right,
It'll be
so-
minimal.
And just, even if we get any money back, it's still, we're gonna still get about, if we can go to this microsystem, that might be $700,000. So there's things that we can find, there's things that we can do. And I would rather you come to me in the middle of the year and say, listen, we got 21% fund balance, we got an emergency we gotta take care of, and let's take care of it. Instead of dragging the money out of people and then find out next year that we got 24 million in increased revenues, or how much increased revenues we're gonna have. We got $12 million in increased revenues. The taxpayer has to benefit from that at some time.
But they are benefiting, and I guess I see it from a different lens, and that is, we do not, within our tax rate, it's not a strategy like we did for the schools, money for capital. You know, when we looked at the schools, we said, this is how much we think their operating should be, this is how much we anticipate their capital being, and that is how the tax rate was established. And I think you all were kind of got some helpful suggestions from your legislature. We would have no capital fund at this point in time if it was not for our fund balance, which comes from two sources, where revenues come in higher than projected, and it usually happens with ad valorem because of the fact that we can only budget based upon prior year collection rate. So if we're more successful, we're not allowed to budget at that level, which is something that I know those who lived through the school board trial heard multiple times. And sales tax right now is pretty good, but I can tell you, when I first got here, sales tax declined year after year after year. And so you never know when the good times stop and you hit a recession and you have an issue. So we use those additional revenues, and we use where monies are not expended, because I don't think any department will expend 100% unless there is some significant event. And that is used, comes one-time money, and that is what is used to fund your capital projects. Without that strategy, you would have absolutely no money to fund new pavement at your parks, doing something different and a new concept with respect to the Monroe Library. That is where those monies come from. So that is my concern, is that if you cut too far, I mean, a 3% give or take, to me it's not a huge difference as it relates to our estimate. To me, that tells me we're pretty spot on. So if we cut too deep, you will not have any capital money available to you without raising taxes or coming up with a different strategy, and I'm not sure what that would be, to fund those capital needs. And they're not to necessarily increase capacity. Many of them are just to maintain a level of service at our public facilities.
Like
And
last year.
that's just a different strategy than the schools use.
Last year when we went through and cut, you know, we had the same thing. You know, we talked about what would be devastating, what would be okay, you know, that, and we had that discussion. And yet this year, even though we cut a penny, we still have $12 million.
But you are seeing service declines. We're seeing service declines in the health department. We're not meeting our mandated costs with respect to the fire marshal and emergency services. A lot of money was cut out of emergency services last year.
What position did we cut in the health department? Didn't we give you 10, 20 positions?
In economic services.
Okay, but did we cut anything in the health department? Because I thought that was one of the focus areas of trying to.
No, you didn't cut anything in health department.
So,
I'm talking about environmental health.
okay, and another.
I'm talking about environmental health.
But
Sorry.
then you go to the information officer. That for 2 years, we cut out of the budget.
If you all don't see that as a priority, then
Well,
don't approve it.
And we won't, but you'll pay $70,000 for something to do it.
Well, you know, there's work to be done, and I have to figure out, you all expect me to run an organization and figure out a way to get it
And
done.
we still have $12 million in increased revenues. That's what I'm saying. There's always a place to look. There's always a place to look. This budget was designed to have a 3.09 tax increase. And that's what was designed.
Because throughout the bond initiative,
We told people.
you told people
We made
there would be a
raising
tax
taxes.
increase.
of 3.09.
There were two different sessions. One was in August and one was in October. that was requested by the board, where we made presentations and representation was made by this board, there would be a 3.15 tax increase. It has been well communicated throughout the entire community. Therefore, since the board has given that direction on 2 different occasions, of course I'm going to use that as an assumption as part of this budget.
Gotcha, but what I'm saying is that did you have to build the budget up to get to that point? It's gonna have a 3.09 cent tax impact, no matter what. And I'm one commissioner that always told people that, hey, the taxes have been raised. And it was raised by these gentlemen doing the right thing years ago that they had to do. The taxes were raised, and the school board sees that. And well, we'll find out if the school board sees that when they do a vote on it. So, you know, you have a situation where you have money that's been raised, and they're willing to live within the money that's been raised. That's what I'm getting an indication from the majority of school board members of talking to them individually. We'll see how they vote, and I believe that they will vote to do that. And if they do, the county needs to respond in kind and try to do as much as we can to offset the cost of the SBCC bond and the library bond. And if we can't do it, we can't do it. And I don't think there's a commissioner up here that would say, I'm not going to vote for any tax increase. But if it's voted on, it will be voted on because of the whole budget. It won't be voted on because of three projects. And the school board, if they take care of theirs, you know, we can't say that it's their fault. If they're living within the money they already have.
But is there commitment through subsequent years that they're going to take a reduced capital amount?
Who controls,
Because it's a 20-year
the
bond.
budget? The county commissioners, right?
You do, yes.
So if that's a commitment made by the school board, and it would be an ongoing thing. We committed 18.5 million, what? 18.5, what is it?
No, it's
what's
about
recommended.
16 million, and then you use fund balance to
Okay.
pay for the rest.
Okay, so you have your commitment of money that's there, it's in the rate already, built into the rate, and we leave it there. We don't change it. We're not talking about cutting taxes this year. We're talking about maintaining as close to the level as we can. Not raising 3.5 cents just to raise it 3.5 cents because the voters said it. That's where I'm at.
Well, we will get these answers to the questions that you all have asked, and then look
Do
for
we
your
need a
guidance.
motion or a vote
On what?
on any of this until, I mean, it's,
Well, I took down notes of all the questions you asked, and we will get that information back to you as soon as possible. If there's other direction, we look for the other direction. At this point in time, all I have is questions that we are to respond to.
I would like to say that, you know, I agree with your statement about consuming all the revenue. Frankly, I see what we got as a spending plan as opposed to a budget, because it's spending everything we can. And we can do better than that.
I don't think we can avoid a tax increase because of the bonds. My question to each of you and everyone would be, how can we mitigate the damage to the county as an increase if it's there? Rather than to spend the 12 million plus some of the reserve.
I'm going to do another work session or?
What would you like it on?
I mean, do we need to, before we get in, you want this settled before we get into the meeting on the,
I certainly don't want a repeat of what we had last year, because I think I would agree with Commissioner Simpson. I think it did not do this organization justice at all to handle it that way.
okay.
I know you liked it, but I was not as pleased with it.
How much we have in savings and how much we have in new revenue? Wasn't a bad thing to do. We did pretty good.
I would like to get your responses back on some of those
Okay.
questions.
We can
And
do
then
that.
once we have the responses, maybe see if we can schedule something.
Okay.
Good.
Oh.
I don't want to do it on the 19th.
No,
Thank you.
it's not the best way to do a budget process.
Any additional comments, questions, concerns? Hearing none, all in favor of adjourning? Aye.
All right.